Please, sir, take my son instead. He's more hungrier than me." The words sliced through the storm like lightning. The billionaire froze, his umbrella slipping, his breath caught between guilt and disbelief. A soaked mother stood in the rain, holding out her trembling boy, not for pity but survival. No one watching that night could have guessed what Grant Maddox did next, and why the whole town would whisper his name forever. "Please, sir, take my son instead. He's hungrier than me." Those words stopped Grant Maddox mid-stride, expensive shoes sinking into puddles as the world seemed to halt around him. The billionaire turned slowly, rain pelting his $1,000 coat as he lowered his umbrella. Tanya Fields stood tall, despite the weight of everything. The rain, her circumstances, the hollow ache of 3 days without a proper meal. Her thin jacket clung to her frame, but her eyes held a fierce dignity that struck Grant like a physical blow. Beside her, 9-year-old Zion shivered, his small hands tucked into the pockets of jeans worn thin at the knees. Dark eyes, too serious for a child his age, darted between his mother and the stranger. "Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story." "What did you just say?" Grant asked, his voice barely audible above the downpour. Tanya straightened her shoulders. "I said take my son instead. He can work, cleaning, errands, anything. Just let him eat first." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the cost of her offer. The rain seemed to pause, suspended between them like the moment itself, a mother's desperate love, a wealthy man's unexpected confrontation with raw humanity. "Mom, I'm okay," Zion whispered, clutching her hand. "We can share whatever we get." Grant Maddox had built an empire on calculated decisions, risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis. Nothing in his life required heart, until now. He studied the woman's face, seeing not a beggar but a warrior at the end of her strength. "I don't want your money," Tanya said before he could reach for his wallet. "Just work, dignity, a chance." Something stirred in Grant's chest, an emotion long buried beneath stock portfolios and board meetings. The last time he'd felt it was 12 years ago, before. No, he wouldn't think about that now. "How long has it been since you've eaten?" he asked. Tanya's eyes flashed. "That's not your concern." "Mom," Zion tugged at her sleeve. "My tummy really hurts." The boy's words broke through her pride. 3 days, she admitted. "We had crackers yesterday." Grant's world tilted on its axis. 3 days. While he'd been complaining about a merger falling through, they'd been starving on these streets. "There's a diner around the corner," he said, extending his umbrella. "Let me buy you both dinner. No strings." Suspicion darkened Tanya's eyes. "Why would someone like you help someone like us?" The question hung between them, heavier than the clouds above. Grant didn't have an answer that made sense even to himself. Only that her words, "take my son instead," had pierced something in him that wealth had armored over. "Because your words just woke something up," he finally said. "Something I thought was dead." Zion looked up at the tall stranger, rain dripping from the man's silver hair onto shoulders that seemed to carry invisible weight. "Are you a good person?" the boy asked simply. Grant Maddox, billionaire, businessman, man who hadn't truly felt anything in years, found himself speechless. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But maybe I could be." Tanya hesitated, weighing desperation against danger before nodding once. "One meal, then we're even." As they walked toward the diner, Grant felt something shift inside him, like ice breaking on a frozen river. The rain continued to fall, washing Main Street clean as 3 strangers moved toward a moment that would change everything. What would you do if you heard those words? Would you keep walking, or would you stop and listen? Sometimes the most important moments come disguised as inconveniences. The diner's bell jingled as they entered, the sudden warmth making Tanya's cold skin prickle painfully. Fluorescent lights exposed what darkness had hidden, the true state of their clothes, their exhaustion, their desperation. Grant watched the hostess's eyes widen, taking in his tailored suit next to Tanya's worn jacket and Zion's two small shoes. "Private booth in the back," he said, sliding $100 bill across the counter. The woman nodded, leading them past curious stares to a corner booth far from windows. Zion climbed onto the vinyl seat, his eyes enormous as he studied the laminated menu. "Order whatever you want," Grant said, settling opposite them. Tanya's hands remained folded on the table. "What work do you need done first?" Grant looked up from his menu. "Excuse me?" "Before we eat." "What work?" She pulled a soggy cardboard sign from inside her jacket. The words "trade, not charity" were written in neat, determined letters. "Have you ever seen someone refuse help they desperately needed? What does that kind of pride cost?" "You don't need to." "I do." Her voice was soft but unyielding. "We don't take handouts." The waitress appeared, pen poised. Grant ordered coffee, while Zion whispered his request to his mother. "Chocolate milk and the chicken finger basket." Tanya translated. "And just water for me." Grant frowned. "You're not eating?" "After I work." Something shifted in Grant's expression. Confusion giving way to a grudging respect. "Order food," he said. "You can work after." "That's not how trades work," she countered. "Value first, payment after." The waitress looked between them, uncomfortable. Grant sighed. "She'll have the deluxe breakfast platter, extra bacon." When the waitress left, Tanya's eyes flashed. "I told you. Consider it an advance." Grant interrupted. "I'm not watching a child eat while his mother goes hungry." Tanya fell silent, studying the man across from her. His expensive watch caught the light as he stirred his coffee. "Why are you doing this?" Grant considered the question. Most people would accept his help without questioning, would grab whatever they could before he changed his mind. "What's your story?" he asked, instead of answering. "Everyone's got one." Tanya's shoulders tensed. "Mine's not special." Grant noticed the way her hands trembled slightly on the table, how she positioned herself between Zion and the exit. Defensive, protective, ready to flee. "That sign?" He nodded toward the cardboard. "You've been doing this a while." 8 months, she admitted, "since we lost our apartment." "And before that?" Something hard flickered across her face. "I was a home health aide, worked for an elderly woman for 3 years. When she died, her son sold the house. We had 2 weeks to find somewhere new." The food arrived. Steaming plates piled high with pancakes, eggs, bacon. Zion's eyes widened at his chicken basket, but he didn't reach for it. "Go ahead, baby," Tanya whispered. The boy's restraint broke, and he began eating with careful, measured bites, the discipline of someone who'd learned to make food last. "Slow down," Tanya cautioned gently. "You'll get sick." Grant watched this exchange with a tightness in his chest. The boy wasn't wolfing down his food like most hungry children would. He was pacing himself, taking small sips of chocolate milk between bites. "You taught him well," Grant observed. Tanya's eyes met his. "Necessity teaches harder lessons than parents ever could." "What would you have sacrificed to keep your child fed?" The question hangs in the air between them. She still hadn't touched her own food. "Please eat," Grant said. "After?" "Fine." Irritation edged his voice. "Clean the windows. Sweep the floor. Whatever makes you feel better. Just eat something first." For the first time, a flicker of a smile touched her lips. "You're not used to people saying no to you." "Not really, no." The honesty in his answer surprised them both. Grant leaned back, studying her with new interest. Most people in her position would grab whatever they could get. Her refusal of charity wasn't just pride, it was identity. Dignity wrapped around her like armor. "Why did you say that?" he asked suddenly. "About your son?" Tanya's hand stilled on her water glass. "Say what?" "Take my son instead." "Did you really think I would?" Pain crossed her face like a shadow. "No, but I needed you to stop walking, to see us." Her voice dropped. "Sometimes shocking people is the only way to make them look." Grant felt something crack inside him. respect and shame mingling like the cream in his coffee. It worked, he admitted. Tanya finally picked up her fork, taking a small bite of eggs. Grant could see her fighting the urge to eat faster, the discipline mirroring her son's. I could use someone to organize my home office, he said suddenly. Files, paperwork, it's a mess. She looked up, suspicion warring with hope. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a trade, he corrected. Your skills for my money. Her eyes narrowed. Why would a billionaire hire a homeless woman? Because you're the first person I've met in years who wouldn't take something for nothing. He leaned forward. And because you've managed to keep your son fed, clothed, and well-mannered despite everything. That takes skill I can't buy. The air between them changed, suspicion giving way to possibility. 1 day's work, she said. Fair pay. Then we decide about tomorrow. Grant extended his hand across the table. Deal. Tanya's palm met his palm. Calloused where his palm was smooth, strong where he expected fragility. One condition, she added. Zion comes too. Grant hesitated. Memories surfacing of his empty home, of spaces that echoed with absence. Fine, he said finally. But you both need to understand something. They waited, tension building in the small space between them. You can earn my money, Grant said, his voice low and intense. But I won't be buying your dignity. That's the one thing I can see you've never sold. Tanya's eyes glistened in the diner's harsh light. And never will. What price would you put on your dignity? Some things aren't for sale, even when you've lost everything else. Everyone out. Now. Grant slid a thick envelope to the diner manager. The place is mine until midnight. The remaining customers and staff exchanged confused glances as the manager nodded, ushering them toward the exit. Within minutes, the diner emptied completely, leaving only Grant, Tanya, and Zion beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. Tanya's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Creating a workspace, Grant replied, removing his wet coat. You wanted to earn your meal. Now you can. Her fingers tightened around Zion's shoulder. This isn't what I grossed. Meant, you need money. I need help. He gestured toward the empty diner. This place needs cleaning. Simple transaction. Have you ever witnessed someone's pride battle their desperation? Which one usually wins? Zion looked up at his mother, uncertainty in his young eyes. The warmth of the diner after days in the cold made his eyelids heavy, his small body swaying slightly with exhaustion. Sit, baby, Tanya whispered, guiding him to a booth. Rest while I work. Grant watched the exchange, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. There's hot chocolate, he said, his voice gentler than before. For the boy. Tanya hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. As she moved toward the cleaning supplies behind the counter, Grant noticed the careful way she walked, like someone carrying an invisible weight, determined not to show its burden. Start with the windows, he directed, settling into a booth with his phone. Then floors. For the next hour, Grant pretended to check emails while secretly watching Tanya work. Her movements were methodical, efficient. No energy wasted. No corners cut. She cleaned each window with the precision of someone who understood that thoroughness was currency. Across the diner, Zion sipped his hot chocolate slowly, making it last. His eyes followed his mother, occasionally drifting to Grant with curious wariness. Your son doesn't trust me, Grant observed. Tanya paused, rag in hand. He's learned to be careful. Smart kid. Necessary kid. She resumed cleaning her back to him. Children in our situation grow up fast. The simple truth of her words struck Grant like a physical blow. He thought of his own childhood. Private schools, summer homes, every need anticipated before he could express it. You're good at this, he said, gesturing to the gleaming windows. I've had practice. I meant the dignity part. Not many would refuse charity when they're, he trailed off. When they're what? Her voice had an edge. Homeless? Hungry? One bad day from disaster? Grant met her eyes across the diner. All of that. A moment of understanding passed between them. respect forming in the space where judgment might have lived. I wasn't always cleaning windows, she said quietly. I had a life before this, a nursing degree, a home. What would you cling to if everything else was stripped away? Your pride? Your faith? Your hope? The confession hung in the air between them. Grant didn't ask what happened. Some stories required earning the right to hear them. My son died, he said instead, the words escaping before he could reconsider. 12 years ago. Tanya's hands stilled on the glass. The admission seemed to change the air in the room. A vulnerability offered, in exchange for her own. I'm sorry, she said simply. Grant nodded, surprised by the relief that came with speaking the truth aloud. How long had it been since he'd acknowledged his loss to anyone? Years of business meetings, charity galas, and superficial relationships where everyone pretended not to know about the billionaire's tragedy. He would have been about your boy's age now, Grant continued, watching Zion slowly trace patterns in his hot chocolate mug. Maybe that's why I stopped when you said what you said. Tanya moved to the next window, but her movements had softened. Children change us, she agreed, even when they're gone. Something shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition of pain that created its own kind of trust. As midnight approached, Tanya finished the last of the cleaning. The diner gleamed under the fluorescent lights, windows spotless, floors shining, counters polished to a mirror finish. Grant stood, assessing her work. You did more than I asked. I always do. She glanced at Zion, who had fallen asleep in the booth, his small face peaceful for the first time that day. That's how you get asked back. Grant reached into his wallet, counting out bills. 200 for 4. Tonight. Tanya's eyes widened. That's too much. It's what the work is worth. She hesitated, then took the money, counting it carefully. After a moment, she extended her hand, returning $50. This is charity, not payment, she said firmly. I'll take fair wages, not pity. Grant stared at the returned money, speechless. When was the last time anyone had given him anything back? Some people's souls remain unbroken even when the world tries to crush them. Have you ever met someone like that? You're a very unusual woman, Tanya Fields, he said finally, tucking the bill back into his wallet. And you're a very unusual billionaire, she countered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. He nodded toward Zion. Where will you sleep tonight? The question stripped away their momentary connection, replacing it with reality's harsh edge. Tanya's face closed like a door. We have a place, she said, the lie obvious to both of them. Grant considered pushing, then thought better of it. I meant what I said about the office job. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. He wrote an address on a napkin. If you're interested. She took the paper, studying it without commitment. Maybe. The offer stands. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. No strings attached. Tanya gathered her few belongings, gently waking Zion. The boy blinked sleepily, automatically reaching for his mother's hand. Why are you really doing this? She asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. Grant looked at her, really looked at her, not as a charity case or a curiosity, but as a human being who had maintained her core self despite circumstances that would have broken most people. Because, he said slowly, you remind me of someone I used to know. Who? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Grant's eyes drifted to the window, where his reflection stared back. Successful, wealthy, empty. Me, he whispered, before I forgot what mattered. As they stepped out into the night, rain still falling softly around them, Grant made a decision that would alter the course of 3 lives. But first, he needed to know one thing. Tanya, he called after her. The sign. Trade, not charity. Why is that so important to you? She turned, her face half illuminated by the diner's neon glow. Zion leaned against her, half asleep on his feet. Because, she said, her voice steady despite everything. The day I start taking handouts is the day I tell my son, we've given up. The words struck him with the force of revelation, not just about her, but about himself. What had he given up? Surrounded by everything money could buy, what have you sacrificed for comfort that might have cost you your soul? Take my son instead. Grant Maddox jolted awake, sweat beading on his forehead. The woman's voice followed him from dreams into consciousness, echoing through his bedroom as if she stood beside his king-sized bed. 3 a.m. Rain still drummed against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city lights like a living painting. His mansion sat atop the highest hill, far above the streets where Tanya and Zion might be huddled tonight. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, bare feet touching Italian marble that cost more than what most families lived on for a year. The day I start taking handouts is the day I tell my son we've given up. Her words haunted him, refusing to fade with wakefulness. Grant moved through the darkness, not bothering with lights. He knew every inch of his empty palace, this monument to success that felt more like a mausoleum each passing year. Have you ever been surrounded by everything and still felt like you had nothing at all? The hallway stretched before him, walls adorned with artwork worth millions, pieces he'd bought because his investment advisor suggested them, not because they moved him. Nothing had moved him in years. Nothing, until a woman stood in the rain and offered her child. Instead of her dignity, Grant paused at a door he rarely opened. His hand hovered over the knob, trembling slightly before he pushed it open. The scent hit him first, faint but preserved, like a memory kept under glass. Citrus and clean cotton. Aiden's room. Moonlight spilled across model airplanes suspended from the ceiling, posters of superheroes frozen mid-flight, a bookshelf filled with adventures never finished. 12 years, and he still couldn't bear to change a single thing. On the nightstand stood a silver frame. Grant lifted it, the familiar weight both comfort and torture. Aiden grinned back at him, gap-toothed and radiant. At 8 years old, just months before the accident. You would have been 20 now, Grant whispered to the photo. In college, dating, building your own life. The resemblance hit him with physical force. Not in features exactly. Aiden had been fair where Zion was dark, but in the eyes, that same quiet watchfulness, the old soul peering out from a child's face. What if we could see the forgotten children all around us? The ones sleeping in cars, sharing their last crackers, teaching themselves to be invisible to survive. Grant sank onto the small bed, frame clutched to his chest. The mattress still held the impression of a child who would never grow up. He'd been halfway across the world when it happened, closing a deal in Tokyo while a drunk driver closed the book on his son's life. His ex-wife's words still cut like knives 12 years later. You weren't there when he needed you. You were never there. She'd been right. Success had been his religion. Wealth, his salvation. He'd missed baseball games and school plays, promising to make it up next time. Until next time became never. The echo of thunder shook the windows, mimicking the tremor in his hands. Grant set the frame down, moving toward Aiden's desk. He opened the drawer with reverent care, removing a small notebook, the last birthday gift he'd given his son. Inside, childish handwriting recorded dreams that would never come true. Build a treehouse, learn to skateboard, help people like Dad does. The last one struck him like a physical blow. Help people like Dad does. Had Aiden really believed that's what his father did? While Grant had been amassing wealth, his son had somehow mistaken it for something meaningful. When was the last time you truly helped someone without expecting anything in return? Grant closed the notebook, pain radiating through his chest. The mansion suddenly felt suffocating. 15,000 square feet of emptiness. Wealth that could buy anything except forgiveness. I'm sorry, he whispered to the room, to the memory, to the years wasted chasing more when he'd already lost everything that mattered. He returned to his bedroom, rain still pounding against glass that separated him from the world below. Sleep wouldn't return tonight. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through endless notifications, stock alerts, meeting, reminders, messages from people who wanted something from him. Not a single person who simply wanted him. On impulse, he opened his banking app. His fortune stared back at him, numbers so large they lost meaning. With a few taps, he transferred $50,000 to his checking account. Dawn broke through clouds as Grant showered and dressed, choosing clothes far simpler than his usual tailored suits. As he passed the kitchen, his housekeeper looked up in surprise. "Mr. Maddox? You're up early." "Maria?" he said, pausing. "Do we have any extra blankets? Warm clothes?" Her eyebrows rose. "Yes, sir. In the linen closet." "And food? Things that don't need cooking?" Understanding dawned on her face. "I'll pack something." 20 minutes later, Grant's car rolled down his private drive, trunk filled with supplies. He hadn't felt this sense of purpose in years, not since closing his first billion-dollar deal. Only this was different. This wasn't about acquisition or power. This was about that look in Tanya's eyes when she'd said, "Trade, not charity." This was about a boy named Zion who shared crackers when he was starving. This was about the haunting possibility of redemption. Grant didn't know if they would come to his office at 9. He didn't know if they'd accept his help or slam the door in his face. But for the first time in 12 years, he was doing something that wasn't about himself. He pulled onto Main Street just as the city began to wake. Rain had finally stopped, leaving puddles that reflected a sky clearing to unexpected blue. Grant parked, scanning sidewalks and storefronts for any sign of them. His phone rang. His assistant, probably wondering why he wasn't at his morning meeting. He silenced it without looking. For an hour, he walked streets he'd driven past 1,000 times without seeing. The homeless man on the corner, the elderly woman counting coins for coffee, the teenager sleeping in a doorway. Had they always been there, these invisible people? Or had he just never allowed himself to see them? As morning stretched toward noon with no sign of Tanya and Zion, something cold settled in Grant's stomach. Had he imagined their impact on him? Had he romanticized their struggle from the safety of his wealth? He turned a corner and froze. There, on a bench outside the public library, sat a small figure with a too-big backpack, alone. Zion. The boy looked up, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Grant," he called, standing. "Mom said you'd come. Where is she?" Grant asked, ice forming in his chest as he noted the tear tracks on the child's face. Zion's lower lip trembled. "They took her away in the ambulance. She wouldn't wake up this morning." The world tilted beneath Grant Maddox's expensive shoes. How many people had he passed by, never stopping to see their humanity until it was almost too late? "She was burning up all night." Zion's voice trembled as he clutched his backpack straps. "I tried to wake her, but she just made this weird sound." Grant's throat tightened. "Which hospital?" "The big one. Memorial, I think." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. "The lady who called 911 said I couldn't go. Said I needed a parent." Morning sun cast long shadows across the library steps as Zion stood there, a small figure bearing an impossible weight. His sneakers were soaked through, jacket zipped wrong, as if he'd dressed himself in panic. "I've been waiting here since they took her," he continued. "Mom always says if we get separated, I should go somewhere with books. Have you ever seen a child trying to be brave when their world is falling apart?" Grant knelt to eye level with Zion, ignoring the dampness seeping into his designer pants. "How did you know I'd come?" The boy's answer stopped his breath. "Mom says God sends people when you need them most." His small shoulders straightened with certainty. "Yesterday he sent you." The simple faith in those words struck deeper than any business negotiation ever had. Grant. They had built skyscrapers, bought companies, moved markets with decisions. Yet this child's trust felt heavier than all of it. "I'm going to help find your mom," Grant said, his voice steadier than he felt. "But first, when did you last eat?" Zion's gaze dropped to his shoes. Yesterday, at the diner. Grant's heart twisted. The boy had been sitting alone for hours, hungry and afraid, yet hadn't mentioned food until asked. Like his mother, dignity ran in his bones. Come on, Grant said, standing and extending his hand. Let's get breakfast before we go to the hospital. Zion hesitated, then took the offered hand, his small fingers cold against Grant's palm. The weight of that small hand felt like trust he hadn't earned. What would you do if a child you barely knew suddenly depended on you completely? The cafe across from the library was crowded with morning customers. Heads turned as Grant guided Zion to a corner table. The billionaire's face recognized even in casual clothes. The rotations, child clearly not belonging in his world. Order whatever you want, Grant said, passing Zion a menu. The boy studied it with careful concentration. Can I get a muffin? Mom likes the blueberry kind. Of course. Grant's chest tightened at the mention of Tanya. We'll get one for her too. When their food arrived, Zion stared at his plate. A breakfast sandwich, fruit cup, and muffin, with wide eyes. Instead of diving in, he carefully broke the muffin in half, wrapping one portion in a napkin. For Mom, he explained, tucking it into his backpack, so she can eat when we find her. The simple gesture cracked something open in Grant's chest, an ache both painful and cleansing. When was the last time he'd thought to save anything for someone else? Your mom taught you well, Grant said softly. Zion nodded, taking a careful bite of his sandwich. She says even when we don't have much, we still have enough to share. Shame washed over Grant. He had everything and shared nothing. They had nothing and shared everything. What grade are you in, Zion? Third. But I haven't been much this year. His small face grew serious. Mom tries to get me there when we have bus money. But sometimes we have to move around a lot. Grant pictured Aiden at that age. Private tutors, educational toys, every advantage money could buy. The contrast felt like accusation. Sometimes the people with the least to give are the most generous. Have you ever been humbled by someone who had every reason to be selfish? What's your favorite subject? Grant asked, watching the boy eat with measured bites. Science. Zion's face brightened. I like learning how things work. Like what things? The sky. Animals. He hesitated, then added shyly, tall buildings like yours. A memory surfaced. Aiden with his blocks, constructing towers that reached toward the ceiling. My son liked building things too, Grant heard himself say. Zion's eyes widened. You have a son? I had one. The words came easier than expected. His name was Aiden. Where is he now? In heaven. Grant's throat tightened. For 12 years. Zion considered this, with the solemn wisdom only children possess. Mom says heaven is closer than we think. Like, right on the other side of the air. The simplicity of the statement brought unexpected tears to Grant's eyes. He blinked them away, stunned by their presence. Your mom is very smart. Yeah. Zion's face clouded. Do you think she's going to be okay? Grant reached across the table, covering the boy's small hand with his own. I'm going to make sure she gets the best care possible. The promise felt sacred, spoken into existence between bites of shared breakfast. Not charity, responsibility. As they finished eating, Zion pulled something from his pocket, a small, smooth stone worn from handling. This is my lucky rock, he said, holding it out to Grant. Mom found it by the river on my birthday. You can borrow it when we go see her. For extra luck. Grant stared at the offered stone, a treasure from a child who owned almost nothing. The gesture cracked open something he'd kept sealed for years, like a vault finally breached. Thank you, he said, voice rough as he accepted the gift. I'll keep it safe. As they walked to Grant's car, Zion's small hand found its way back into his car. Not from instruction, but instinct. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar, like remembering a song once known by heart. Mr. Grant? Zion looked up, morning light catching his serious eyes. Are you scared too? The question stripped away pretense. This child didn't need a billionaire's confidence. He needed truth. Yes, Grant admitted. I am. Zion nodded, satisfied with the honesty. Mom says it's okay to be scared, as long as you don't let it stop you from doing the right thing. More wisdom from a woman who owned nothing but her principles. Grant felt something shift inside him. Ice cracking after the longest winter. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. What does that mean? It means special. One of a kind. Zion nodded. Like you? The comparison startled Grant. No, I'm just rich. But you stopped when no one else did. Zion said simply, Mom prayed someone would see us. And then you came. The words settled over Grant like judgment and grace combined. Had he been an answer to prayer? Or just a man who, for once, hadn't looked away? At the hospital entrance, Grant felt Zion's hand tighten in his. The boy's earlier bravery faltered at the sight of the imposing building. What if she's... Zion couldn't finish the sentence. Grant knelt again, looking directly into those two old eyes. Listen to me. I make billion-dollar deals every day. People don't say no to me. He squeezed the small hand in his. I promise you, we're going to help your mom. The certainty in his voice wasn't business strategy. It was a vow. As they walked through the automatic doors, a doctor in a white coat approached. Clipboard in hand. Are you Zion Field's father? She asked, eyes moving between them. Before Grant could correct her, Zion answered. He's taking care of me until we find my mom, he said with complete trust. Is she okay? The doctor's expression changed. Compassion mixing with something darker. I need to speak with an adult responsible for Tanya Fields, she said, her eyes now fixed on Grant. Immediately, Child Protective Services has been notified. Grant felt Zion's hand go rigid in his grip. What would you risk for a child who wasn't yours? Pneumonia, severe malnutrition, and exhaustion, the doctor explained as they stood outside Tanya's hospital room. She pushed herself until her body simply couldn't anymore. Grant's jaw tightened as he looked through the window at Tanya's small form beneath sterile white sheets. Machines beeped steadily beside her, an IV dripping fluids into her arm. Zion sat at her bedside, his hand carefully holding hers, the half muffin placed hopefully on her tray. Will she recover? Grant asked. With proper care, yes. But Mr. Maddox, the doctor lowered her voice. Child Protective Services is concerned about the living situation. Without proof of stable housing. I'll handle it, Grant interrupted. Tanya Fields works for me. Her housing situation is temporary due to renovations at her apartment. My company is covering their hotel until it's complete. The lie flowed smoothly. Practiced ease from years of business negotiations. The doctor's expression shifted from concern to recognition. Oh, I see. In that case, please ensure Miss Fields receives the best care possible. Grant continued, pulling out his platinum card. Any expenses, treatments, specialists needed, charge everything to this. Have you ever told a lie that felt more honest than any truth you'd spoken before? 3 days later, Grant sat in his parked Mercedes across from the hospital entrance. He'd paid for Tanya's private room, arranged for Zion to stay with, her outside visiting hours, and ensured the CPS inquiry was closed with a few well-placed calls. Yet something kept pulling him back here each day, watching from a distance as mother and son navigated their precarious world. Today, Tanya was being discharged. Grant had offered to drive them, but she'd politely declined. You've done enough, she'd said, the words carrying both gratitude and boundary. Now he watched as they emerged through the sliding doors, Tanya noticeably thinner, leaning slightly on her son. The hospital had provided a bag of medications, which she clutched carefully, their lives contained in a single backpack Zion carried. Instead of approaching, Grant turned the key, following at a distance as they walked to the bus stop. What was he doing? Spying on them like some obsessed stalker? No. Bearing witness, there was a difference. The bus took them to a laundromat in a neighborhood Grant had never visited, despite living in this city for 30 years. Through the large windows, he watched Tanya count coins carefully before starting a single load, Zion helping sort the meager pile of clothing. While the machine ran, Tanya approached an elderly man sorting his own laundry. Words were exchanged, and then she began folding his clothes while he rested on a plastic chair, his cane propped beside him. She's still working, Grant realized. Still trading rather than asking. What does it say about a person when they give from their emptiness, while others hoard from their abundance? 2 hours later, they exited with their small bundle of clean clothes. The old man pressed something into Tanya's hand. A few dollars, perhaps. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. To Grant's astonishment, they didn't head toward food or shelter. Instead, they walked 3 blocks to a park where a homeless veteran sat on a bench, cardboard sign propped beside him. Tanya approached, speaking briefly before offering half of whatever the old man had given her. The veteran's weathered face cracked into a smile as he accepted. Grant's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She had nothing, less than nothing, yet shared what little came her way. When had he last given anything that actually cost him? He followed as they continued to a small church with a community meal program. Through the window, he watched Zion help set up tables while Tanya spoke with the coordinator. Soon she was serving food to others in need, Zion passing out napkins beside her. Only after everyone else had eaten did they sit down with their own plates. The contrast struck Grant with physical force. His morning had begun with a private chef, preparing a breakfast he'd barely touched, before heading to meetings where millions were discussed as casually as weather. He owned 7 properties across 3 continents, yet couldn't remember the last time he'd truly felt at home in any of them. Tanya owned nothing, yet seemed to belong everywhere she went, connected to the elderly man, the homeless veteran, the community around her. Wealth and poverty, emptiness and fullness. The paradox burned in his chest. As evening approached, he watched them enter a budget motel. Not the dangerous one they'd been in before, but a slightly better option his money had quietly arranged through an anonymous credit card left at the desk in their name. From his car, Grant made a call. "I need everything you can find on Tanya Fields," he told his head of security. Previous employment, education, medical history, why she lost her housing, everything. "Sir, that's somewhat invasive. I'm not trying to harm her," Grant interrupted. "I'm trying to help, but I need to understand how someone like her ended up." "Like what? Homeless but dignified? Broken but undefeated? Just get me the information," he finished. As night fell, Grant remained parked across from the motel, his luxury car incongruous in the neighborhood of pawn shops and check-cashing businesses. Through a gap in the curtains of room 118, he could see Tanya and Zion sitting on the edge of the bed, heads bowed in what appeared to be prayer. His phone chimed with an incoming email from his security team. The subject line: Tanya Fields, background check complete. Have you ever realized that knowing someone's story might change everything about how you see them? Grant's thumb hovered over the notification. Did he have the right to open this window into their lives? Would knowledge bring responsibility he wasn't prepared to accept? Before he could decide, movement caught his eye. Zion was at the window now, small fingers pulling the curtain aside as he peered out into the darkness. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met across the distance, the billionaire in his car, and the boy who had nothing. Zion raised his hand in a small wave, and then the curtain fell closed. The boy had seen him, had known he was watching all along. Grant started his car with trembling fingers, shame burning through to him as he pulled away. What kind of man was he, Doc? Stalking a struggling single mother and her son from the safety of his luxury vehicle. The kind of man his wealth had made him. An observer rather than a participant in real life. Watching suffering through tinted windows instead of reaching out his hands to help. As he drove toward his empty mansion on the hill, Grant opened the email. The glow of his phone illuminating the darkness of his car. The first line stopped his breath. Tanya Fields, former registered nurse, lost medical license after whistleblowing against Maddox Memorial Hospital's dangerous cost-cutting practices 3 years ago. The hospital that bore his family name, the one his company owned, the one where his signature had approved the very policies that had destroyed her life. What would you do if you discovered you were responsible for the suffering of the very people you were trying to help? You destroyed my life. Tanya stood in the doorway of the motel room, arms crossed, her face pale with anger and lingering illness. The accusation hung between them like a live wire. Grant hadn't planned to confront her tonight. The revelation about her whistleblowing had kept him awake until dawn, poring over old reports, hospital board minutes, the lawsuit that had been settled quietly. But when morning came, he found himself at her door instead of his office. "May I come in?" he asked. "Why? To finish what your hospital started?" Her voice was steady despite the fever still lingering in her eyes. Behind her, Zion appeared, confusion crossing his face. "Mr. Grant?" "Hello, Zion." Grant managed a smile that felt brittle on his face. "I came to check on your mom." "You came to ease your conscience," Tanya corrected. "Now that you know who I am, have you ever faced someone who had every reason to hate you?" Grant's silence confirmed her suspicion. 3 years ago, she continued, each word precise as a scalpel, I reported dangerous staffing cuts at your hospital. Patients were dying from preventable errors. When administration ignored me, I went public. "I remember," Grant admitted, "but I didn't know it was you." "Of course not. Why would you? I was just a name on a settlement agreement that required my silence and surrendered my nursing license." The bitterness in her voice felt deserved. His company's lawyers had handled it efficiently. A threat neutralized. A problem contained. "Mom?" Zion tugged at her sleeve. "You're getting upset again." Her expression softened instantly for her son. "It's okay, baby. Can Mr. Grant come in?" the boy asked. "He helped us at the hospital." Tanya hesitated, maternal protection warring with practical reality. Finally, she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she said. The motel room was small but meticulously organized, their few belongings arranged with dignity. Zion's homework spread across the small table, a library book open beside it. "I've come to make an offer," Grant said, remaining standing when Tanya didn't invite him to sit. "A job. In my home." Her laugh held no humor. "Working for the man who took everything from me? No thanks. Not for me. For my household." He met her eyes directly. "Full-time position. Living quarters included. Healthcare benefits starting immediately." The naked calculation crossed her face, weighing pride against Zion's needs. "Why would you hire someone who exposed your company's corruption?" "Because you were right." The admission cost him. "And because you're exactly the kind of person I need." "What kind is that?" "Someone who values truth over comfort. Someone who doesn't bend." The words hung between them. An olive branch, a recognition, perhaps even the beginning of atonement. "You rich people are all the same," Tanya said, shaking her head. "You think money fixes everything. Throw enough cash at a problem and it disappears." "Then test me," Grant challenged, the words emerging before he could reconsider. "Take the job. Watch at me closely. If it's just guilt money, walk away." Would you give someone who hurt you a second chance? Or is forgiveness sometimes too high a price? Tanya's gaze was steady, measuring. What would I be doing? Exactly. Managing my household. Organizing my life. He gestured vaguely. I have staff, but no one coordinating them. The place is empty. Like a museum, Zion piped up, earning a sharp look from his mother. Yes, Grant agreed, surprising himself with a small smile. Exactly like that. Tanya moved to the window, looking out at the parking lot, where previous tenants had left shattered glass. Beyond it, the city skyline rose, Grant's own tower visible in the distance. What's the pay? She asked finally. $80,000 a year, plus benefits, housing, meals. Her head whipped around. That's ridiculous. It's market rate for a household manager with your qualifications. My qualifications? Bitter amusement colored her voice. Homeless single mother? Former nurse with a revoked license? Someone who notices what needs fixing and isn't afraid to name it, Grant countered. Someone who builds community wherever she goes. I saw you yesterday, at the laundromat, with the veteran, at the church. Her expression changed. You were following us. Observing, he corrected, though the distinction felt weak. I needed to understand. Understand what? How someone loses everything and keeps their humanity intact. The rawness in his voice surprised them both. While others gain everything and lose their soul in the process, the silence stretched between them, tension vibrating like a plucked string. Do you have a garden? Zion asked suddenly, the innocence of the question breaking the moment. Grant blinked. What? A garden? For growing stuff. The boy looked up earnestly. At my old school we had one. I got to grow tomatoes. Tanya's expression softened, watching her son. Zion loves plants, she explained. Keep seeds in his backpack everywhere we can. Go. We could plant one, Grant offered, turning to the boy. There's plenty of space. Zion's face brightened. Really? Mom, can we? Tanya looked between them, her son's hope and Grant's uncertain offer. Something shifted in her expression. 1 month, she said finally. Trial period. We'll stay in separate guest quarters, not the main house. I set my own hours around Zion's school schedule. You're considering it? Grant couldn't hide his surprise. For him, she nodded toward Zion. And because running away from what happened at Maddox Memorial doesn't serve anyone. Her directness cut through pretense, naming the unspoken wound between them. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a reckoning. There's one more condition, Tanya continued. You fix what happened at your hospital. Real changes, not just PR bandages. Grant felt the weight of her demand. Not for herself, but for the patients and staff still affected by policies he'd signed off on without thought. I'll need your help, he admitted. You know what needs changing better than I do. For the first time, something like cautious respect flickered in her eyes. I've had 3 years to think about it. Sometimes, redemption starts with admitting you need help from the very person you've wronged. Would you have the courage to cross that bridge? When do we start? She asked. Today, if you're willing. Let me pack our things. She glanced around the small room. Won't take long. As Tanya gathered their few belongings, Zion approached Grant, his expression serious beyond his years. Are you going to help my mom get her nursing job back? The question landed like a blow, direct and unavoidable. Grant looked into the boy's trusting eyes and saw both challenge and hope. I'm going to try, he promised, the words creating their own contract. Zion studied him, then nodded once, accepting the pledge with the solemn gravity only children can muster. She helps everyone else, the boy said quietly. But nobody helps her. The simple truth struck deeper than any boardroom argument. Grant placed a hand gently on Zion's shoulder. That's going to change, he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Outside, Grant's driver loaded their single backpack and small duffel into the trunk of the Mercedes, a task that would have required multiple trips for his own weekend luggage. As the car pulled away from the motel, Tanya stared straight ahead, her profile etched with caution and determination. Beside her, Zion pressed his face to the window, watching the city transform block by block, from struggling neighborhoods to tree-lined avenues that climb toward the hills. Your home is up there? He asked, pointing toward the mansions visible in the distance. Yes, Grant replied, noticing how Tanya's hands tightened in her lap. That's where rich people live, the boy observed. Some of them, Grant agreed, but having a big house doesn't make you rich in the ways that matter. Tanya's eyes met his in the rear-view mirror, skeptical, wary, but something else too, a willingness to see what happened next. As they turned up the private drive toward his estate, Grant's phone rang. His executive assistant, voice tight, with controlled panic. "Sir, where are you? The board is waiting. The hospital merger vote. Cancel it," Grant said. "Excuse me? Cancel the vote." His decision crystallized with sudden clarity. "In fact, gather the hospital board instead. We're changing direction." He ended the call, aware of Tanya's startled expression. "What merger?" she asked quietly. Grant met her eyes as the car stopped before his mansion's imposing entrance. "The one that would have cut staffing at 3 more hospitals," he admitted. "Just like Maddox Memorial 3 years ago." The weight of understanding passed between them. What had been set in motion? What had nearly happened again? "Why did you stop it?" she asked, challenge in her voice. Grant looked at Zion, then back to her, the truth rising like dawn after the longest night. "Because sometimes it takes losing everything to see what matters," he said. "And sometimes it takes meeting someone who never forgot." What would you change if you suddenly saw your life through the eyes of those affected by your choices? The massive iron gate swung open silently, revealing a driveway that curved through manicured gardens toward a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds. Tanya's breath caught audibly as the full scale of Grant's wealth materialized before them. "This is where you live?" Zion whispered, nose pressed against the window. "By yourself?" Grant shifted uncomfortably. "I have staff. Housekeeper, groundskeeper, security. But no family," Tanya observed quietly. The car stopped at the entrance. Grand stone steps leading to doors that would dwarf a giant. Maria, the housekeeper, stood waiting, her professional smile faltering slightly at the sight of Tanya and Zion emerging from the car with their single backpack. "Mr. Maddox, we weren't expecting," she began. "Maria, this is Tanya Fields, our new household manager, and her son Zion." Grant's tone left no room for questions. "Please prepare the garden suite for them." Maria's eyes widened briefly before her training reasserted itself. "Of course, sir. Right away." Have you ever felt immediately out of place somewhere? Like the universe made a mistake in your delivery address? Tanya stood frozen on the marble steps, her worn sneakers a stark contrast against the polished stone. Zion gripped her hand tightly, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in their reality. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, a crystal chandelier hanging like a frozen waterfall above them. Priceless artwork lined walls the color of fresh cream. Every surface gleamed with perfection, as though dirt wouldn't dare settle here. "It looks like a museum," Tanya murmured, unconsciously echoing Zion's earlier assessment. "It feels like one too," Grant admitted. "Come, I'll show you around." As they moved through the mansion, each room revealed new opulence. The formal living room with furniture too pristine to suggest actual use. The dining room with a table that could seat 20. The study lined with leather-bound books, arranged by color rather than content. Nowhere were there signs of life, no magazines left open, no coffee mugs forgotten, no shoes kicked off in corners. The perfection felt airless, like a stage set waiting for actors to arrive. "Does anyone actually live here?" Tanya asked, running her finger along a spotless shelf. "I exist here," Grant corrected, the distinction revealing more than he intended. "There's a difference." Zion, meanwhile, had wandered to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the back gardens. "Whoa!" he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the perfect acoustics. "Mom, come look!" Tanya joined him at the window, her composure cracking at the sight of sprawling grounds that stretched toward distant trees. A stone path wound around a dormant fountain, past rose gardens waiting for spring, and toward a glass structure that caught the afternoon light. "Is that a greenhouse?" she asked. Grant nodded. "Unused for years. The previous owners were gardeners." "Can we see it?" Zion asked, bouncing slightly on his toes. The first genuine smile Grant had worn in days crossed his face. "Of course. What happens when life suddenly returns to spaces long abandoned to emptiness?" Outside, Zion broke free from his mother's cautious grip, running ahead down the stone path, with the uninhibited joy only children possess. His laughter, bright and startling, seemed to ripple across the manicured lawn like a stone disturbing still water. "Zion, be careful," Tanya called, maternal concern outweighing her own discomfort. "Let him explore," Grant said gently. "It's safe here." Her eyes met his, suspicion lingering. Nothing is ever completely safe. The truth of her statement hung between them, a lesson learned through lived experience rather than philosophy. At the greenhouse, Zion's face pressed against the glass, breath fogging the panes. Inside, abandoned pottery sat empty on wrought iron tables, dormant soil waiting in bags against the wall. The potential for life remained, though long neglected. "Can we plant our garden in here?" Zion asked as Grant unlocked the door. "If you want." The simplicity of granting the boy's wish felt foreign to Grant, accustomed to complex negotiations and strategic concessions rather than straightforward gifts. Zion stepped inside, inhaling deeply. "It smells like waiting," he declared. Grant and Tanya exchanged a glance, surprise at the child's poetic assessment. "That's exactly right," Grant agreed softly. As they returned to the house, Zion's excitement spilled over into a stream of questions about the fountain, the trees, the birds that nested in the eaves. Each query pierced the mansion's practiced silence, each answer from Grant loosening something tight within his chest. Have you ever witnessed how a child's curiosity can bring forgotten spaces back to life? Maria intercepted them at the kitchen door. "The garden suite is ready, sir." "Thank you, Maria. This is your domain," Grant gestured to Tanya. "As household manager, you'll be coordinating with the staff." "Maria's been with me for 8 years. The two women assessed each other, one in her pressed uniform, the other in her thrift store clothes, both carrying dignity like armor. "It's nice to meet you," Tanya offered, extending her hand. Maria hesitated briefly before accepting. "You as well, Miss Fields. Just Tanya is fine." "Tanya," Maria echoed, a tentative smile forming. "You have a beautiful son." The compliment visibly softened Tanya's guard. "Thank you." Grant watched this exchange with dawning realization how rarely genuine human connection happened within these walls. How Maria's professional distance mirrored his own isolation. "I'm hungry," Zion announced, breaking the moment with a child's perfect timing. "Let me make something," Maria offered immediately. "I can do it," Tanya countered, her independence instinctive. Grant observed the subtle power dynamic, then suggested, "Perhaps you could both prepare something? Show Tanya where everything is, Maria?" The women nodded. An unspoken truce formed as they moved toward the industrial-grade kitchen with Zion trailing behind. Grant retreated to his study, pretending to work while listening to the sounds filtering through the normally silent house, cabinets opening, water running, Zion's excited voice, the women's responses growing more relaxed with each exchange. The mansion that had stood like a mausoleum that morning now hummed with life. Small disturbances in the perfect stillness, ripples in the frozen pond of his existence. When was the last time your home felt truly alive with presence instead of just possessions? An hour later, Maria appeared at his study door. "They're settled in the garden suite, sir." And she hesitated, then continued, "I've invited them to join us for staff dinner tonight. I hope that's acceptable." Grant looked up, surprised. "Staff dinner?" Maria's expression revealed his ignorance. "Yes, sir. The household staff eats together on Wednesday nights. We've been doing it for years. Years. In his own home. A tradition he'd never known existed. Of course that's acceptable," he managed. "In fact, I'd like to join you." Maria couldn't hide her shock. "You would, sir?" "Yes, if I'm welcome." "Of course you're welcome," she said. The "sir" notably absent for the first time in their 8-year relationship. "It's your home." But was it? The question lingered as Grant stood at his window later, watching Tanya and Zion explore the garden suite's private patio. The boy was pointing excitedly at something Bird, perhaps, while his mother smiled down at him, her hand gently stroking his hair. The simple intimacy of the gesture pierced Grant like a physical pain. When was the last time anyone had touched him with such natural affection? Years, decades. He turned away, unable to watch without feeling like a voyeur of genuine connection. His gaze fell on the silver frame that had traveled with him from his bedroom to his office. Aiden's smiling face a reminder of what he'd lost, what he'd failed to appreciate until it was gone. As darkness fell, Grant made his way to the staff dining room, a space he'd barely known existed in the East Wing. Outside the door, he hesitated, hearing laughter and conversation. He gees the sounds of people at ease with each other. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The conversation stopped abruptly as 6 faces turned toward him. Maria, the groundskeeper, 2 security guards, the part-time chef, and Tanya. Zion sat perched on a booster seat, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Mr. Maddox, the groundskeeper James, recovered first. Please, join us. Grant moved to the empty chair beside Zion, aware of the subtle tension his presence created. These people worked in his home, maintained his life, yet remained strangers. Thank you for having me, he said, the formality awkward even to his own ears. Zion broke the tension with a child's directness. Mr. Grant, I found a pond with fish in it. Can I feed them tomorrow? Of course, Grant replied, relief warming his voice. They're koi fish, very old and very wise. The boy's eyes widened with delight. Do they have names? No, Grant admitted. Perhaps you could name them. Really? Zion looked to his mother for confirmation of this extraordinary privilege. Tanya nodded, her eyes meeting Grant's across the table, a moment of genuine connection forming in the space between them. As the meal progressed, Grant found himself speaking less as a billionaire and more as simply a man sharing food with others. Questions about families were exchanged, stories told, laughter offered without reservation. When was the last time you sat at a table where your wealth or status didn't matter, where you were simply human? Later, walking Tanya and Zion back to their suite, Grant felt something he couldn't immediately identify. It took him halfway across the moonlit garden to recognize it. Peace. Your staff loves you, Tanya observed quietly as Zion ran ahead, chasing fireflies that had emerged in the warm evening. Grant looked at her in surprise. They barely know me. They know enough, she countered. They've stayed with you for years, despite your distance. The gentle criticism felt earned rather than accusatory. I haven't been present, he acknowledged, even in my own home. It's not too late to change that, she offered, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. As they reached the garden suite, Zion turned suddenly, throwing his arms around Grant's waist in an impulsive hug. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Grant, and for the fish pond, and for helping my mom. The child's embrace froze. Grant momentarily, the simple human contact, foreign yet achingly familiar. Slowly, he placed a hand on Zion's shoulder, returning the gesture with unpracticed care. You're welcome, he managed, emotion tightening his throat. Over the boy's head, his eyes met Tanya's consove, her expression unreadable in the garden's soft lighting. Good night, Mr. Maddox, she said, her formality at odds with the intimacy of the moment. Grant, he corrected gently. Please, call me Grant. Something shifted in her gaze, a barrier lowering slightly. Good night, Grant. As he walked back toward the main house, Grant felt the mansion differently, not as a symbol of achievement, but as a space waiting to be filled with meaning. Inside his bedroom, his phone chimed with a message from his executive assistant. Hospital board demanding explanation for canceled merger. Emergency meeting called for 7 a.m. Reality crashed back with cold efficiency. Tomorrow, he would face the consequences of his decision, the first one he'd made in years based on conscience rather than profit. Grant moved to the window, gazing toward the garden suite where a soft light still glowed. In one day, they had transformed his empty house into something approaching a home. What would they change next? The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. What part of your life feels like an empty mansion, waiting for someone to bring it back to life? I don't need your charity. The words echoed through the mansion's grand kitchen as Grant stepped through the doorway, stopping short at the scene before him. Tanya stood facing Maria, tension radiating between them, a basket of groceries on the counter between them. It's not charity, Miss Fields, Maria insisted. It's standard procedure to stock the staff pantry. I can buy our own food, Tanya countered. Dignity wrapped around her like armor. I start working today. I'll earn it. Grant cleared his throat, both women turning toward him. Morning sun streamed through windows, still beaded with last night's rain, casting the kitchen in golden light that felt almost intrusive on the tense moment. Good morning, he offered carefully. Maria nodded respectfully before excusing herself, leaving Grant alone with Tanya. The remains of the hospital board meeting still clung to him. 3 hours of defending his decision to cancel the merger, of powerful men questioning his judgment, his competence, even his sanity. Now this, another battle in his own kitchen. I apologize for interrupting, he said. Tanya's shoulders remained tight. Your staff thinks I'm a charity case. They're trying to welcome you, Grant corrected gently. It's not about charity. It's about belonging. Something in his words seemed to reach her. The fight gradually drained from her posture, replaced by a weariness that revealed how much energy her pride required. Have you ever been so determined to stand on your own that you forgot how to accept kindness? Where's Zion? Grant asked, changing the subject. With James at the koi pond. A reluctant smile touched her lips. Naming the fish, Grant moved toward the coffee maker, giving her space. And, what are you making? He nodded toward bowls and ingredients she'd arranged before the confrontation with Maria. Soup, she said simply. My grandmother's recipe. May I watch? The question seemed to surprise her. You want to watch me cook? If that's all right. Tanya studied him a moment, then nodded, turning back to her preparation. I need to chop these vegetables. Grant settled on a stool at the kitchen island, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened. The rhythm of her knife against the cutting board filled the silence. Steady, practiced, precise. You've had a difficult morning, she observed without looking up. Grant raised an eyebrow. How can you tell? Your shoulders, the way you hold your jaw. Her knife never paused. My grandmother called it carrying thunder inside. The accuracy of her assessment startled him. The hospital board wasn't pleased with my decision. Did you expect them to be? No, he admitted. But I didn't expect quite so much resistance to doing the right thing. Tanya glanced up, her eyes meeting his. People resist change, especially when it costs them money. The simple truth hung between them. She returned to her chopping, adding vegetables to a pot where onions were already softening in olive oil. That smells incredible, Grant said. Wait until it really gets going. She stirred the pot gently. My grandmother made this every Sunday. Said it could heal anything from a cold to a broken heart. When was the last time someone cooked something in this kitchen with love instead of obligation? What's in it? Grant asked. The usual? Vegetables, herbs, chicken. She added broth to the pot. And faith. Faith? Her hands moved with certainty, adding a pinch of this, a sprinkle of that. Grandma said you have to believe in the healing to make it work. A small smile played at her lips. You stir in the faith with everything else. I'm not sure I remember what that tastes like, Grant admitted. Their eyes met across the kitchen island, an unexpected moment of raw honesty between them. That's the thing about faith, Tanya said softly. It waits for you, even when you forget it exists. Outside, clouds parted completely, flooding the kitchen with sunlight that seemed to transform ordinary objects into something precious. The steel appliances gleamed. The copper pots hanging above the island caught fire with reflected light, and for a moment, the kitchen felt like someplace sacred. Have you ever experienced a moment when ordinary surroundings suddenly felt touched by something greater? Tell me about your grandmother, Grant said. Tanya's movement slowed, memory softening her features. She raised me after my mother died. Worked 3 jobs, but always had Sundays for soup and stories. She stirred the pot, steam rising like prayers. She never finished high school, but was the wisest person I've ever known. What happened to her? Cancer. 5 years. Pain flickered across Tanya's face. I was her nurse at the end. The revelation settled between them, her career choice suddenly making deeper sense. That's why you became a nurse, Grant observed. Tanya nodded. To give back what she gave me. Care. Dignity. Her eyes lifted to his. When your hospital cut corners, patients suffered. I couldn't stay silent. The accusation was gentler now, tempered by understanding rather than anger. I never saw the human cost, Grant admitted. Just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's the problem with distance, Tanya said, adding herbs to the pot. It makes it easier to hurt people without meaning to. The wisdom in her words struck him. How much of his life had been lived at a safe distance, from employees, from consequences, from genuine connection? Your grandmother would be proud of you, he said quietly. For cleaning houses and serving soup? A trace of bitterness edged her voice. For never compromising your values. Grant corrected. Even when it cost you everything. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise at being truly seen. The kitchen door burst open as Zion raced in, cheeks flushed with excitement, James the groundskeeper following behind with an apologetic smile. Mom, Mr. Grant, I named all the fish, Zion announced. The orange one is Rocket. The spotted one is Galaxy. The big black one is Night Sky. Space names. Tanya translated, smoothing her son's wild hair. He wants to be an astronaut this week. Last week, it was a marine biologist, James added with a chuckle. Grant watched the easy interaction between them, something aching in his chest. In just 24 hours, Tanya and Zion had formed connections with his staff that he'd failed to build in years. What walls have you built that keep you from truly connecting with the people around you? Is that Grandma's healing soup? Zion asked, peering into the pot. It is, Tanya confirmed. Want to add the secret ingredient? The boy nodded solemnly. Tanya lifted him up, whispering something in his ear. Zion closed his eyes, his small face scrunched in concentration as he stirred the pot 3 times clockwise. What was that? Grant asked, when Zion had been set down. Faith, the boy answered simply. You can't see it, but it's there. Grant found himself smiling, genuinely, without effort or strategy. I believe you. Later, as they sat around the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room, Grant took his first spoonful of the soup. Flavors bloomed across his tongue. Familiar ingredients transformed into something that tasted like home. This is incredible, he murmured. Told you, Zion said through a mouthful. It's the faith part. Tanya watched Grant carefully. You look different today. Different how? Less. She searched for the word. Burdened. He considered this, realizing she was right. Despite the contentious board meeting, something had lightened within him. I feel different, he admitted. The soup's already working, Zion declared with absolute certainty. The adults exchanged glances over his head. Amusement mixed with something deeper. Maybe it is, Grant agreed softly. As they finished eating, Tanya rose to clear the dishes, waving off Grant's offer to help. This is my job now. Remember? Speaking of jobs, Grant said, I have a proposition. Tanya's guard visibly rose. What kind of proposition? The hospital needs someone to audit patient care standards. Someone who knows what to look for. Someone who can't be intimidated or bought. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You want me to go back there? After everything? I want you to help me fix what went wrong, Grant clarified. Not as a nurse yet. We'll work on getting your license reinstated, but as a consultant with full authority. The dish Tanya was holding froze midway to the sink. "Why would you trust me with that?" "Because you were right 3 years ago," Grant said simply. "And I was wrong." "When was the last time you admitted being wrong to someone you'd hurt?" Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the kitchen into a cathedral of ordinary moments. Outside, the garden glistened with raindrops that clung to leaves and petals like reluctant tears. "I'll think about it," Tanya said finally. Grant nodded, understanding her caution. Trust, like faith, couldn't be manufactured or purchased. As he rose to leave, Zion called after him. "Are you coming for dinner tonight, Mr. Grant?" The simple question caught him off guard. The assumption that he might choose to eat with them rather than alone in his study. "I'd like that," he said, surprised by how much he meant it. Tanya's eyes met his across the kitchen, something unspoken passing between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. "The soup will be even better tomorrow," she said. "That's the thing about healing recipes. They get stronger with time." Grant nodded, understanding she wasn't just talking about soup. As he walked back to his office, he realized he was humming, a small, unconscious expression of contentment he couldn't remember experiencing in years. The mansion no longer felt like a museum or mausoleum. For the first time, it felt like it might someday become a home. His phone buzzed with a text from his executive assistant. "Thomas Westfield requesting urgent meeting. Says he has information about Tanya Fields. You need to hear." Thomas Westfield, head of legal for the hospital system. The man who had orchestrated Tanya's settlement and silence 3 years ago. The lightness in Grant's chest hardened into dread. What secrets might be revealed when the past refuses to stay buried? 102.4 degrees. Grant read the thermometer with growing concern. It's getting higher. Midnight had come and gone, storm clouds gathering outside the mansion windows like harbingers of what was to come. Zion lay on his bed in the garden suite, skin flushed with fever, eyes glassy and unfocused. Tanya pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, her face tight with fear she was trying desperately to hide. "He was fine at dinner," she whispered. "Just tired." 3 hours earlier, Zion had pushed away his plate, complaining of a headache. By bedtime, the fever had appeared. Now, his breathing came in shallow gasps that seemed to tear through both adults with each inhale. "Mom," Zion murmured, his voice cracking with thirst. "The stars are spinning." Tanya's eyes met Grant's across the bed, panic flaring between them like electrical current. "We need to get him to a hospital," Grant said, already reaching for his phone. Tanya shook her head. "The medicine will kick in soon. He just needs rest." "Tanya." Grant's voice was gentle but firm, his fevers rising too quickly. "This isn't normal. Have you ever watched someone you love fight against accepting help they desperately need?" Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, vibrating through the foundations of the house. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then with increasing fury, as if mirroring the crisis unfolding within. "I can't afford," Tanya began. "I can," Grant interrupted. "And that's not what matters right now." A small sound from the bed stopped their argument. Zion's eyes had rolled back, his small body suddenly rigid. "He's seizing!" Tanya cried, maternal instinct overriding pride, as she gathered her son in her arms. "Call 911! My driver will be faster." Grant was already dialing, barking orders into the phone. "Meet us at the front entrance. Now." Time compressed into urgent fragments. Grant lifting Zion's burning body, Tanya grabbing medications and the boy's favorite stuffed dinosaur. The mad dash through rain-slicked gardens, storm winds tearing at their clothes. In the car, Zion lay across both their laps, Tanya cradling his head while Grant kept his legs elevated. The seizure had passed, leaving the boy limp and disoriented. "Drive faster," Grant ordered, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. The car surged forward, wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Lightning split the sky. momentarily illuminating Tanya's face, terror etched into every line. The hospital's 10 minutes away. The driver called back. Make it 5, Grant countered, his hand finding Tanya's shoulder in the darkness. She didn't pull away from his touch. Progress, even in crisis. What would you risk for someone who isn't family by blood, but has somehow become essential to your heart? Stay with me, baby, Tanya whispered to Zion, who drifted between consciousness and something darker. Tell me about the koi fish again. Rocket. Galaxy. Zion's voice was faint, each word an effort. Night sky. That's right, she encouraged, tears mingling with raindrops on her cheeks. What about the white one? Moonbeam, he whispered, before his eyes fluttered closed again. Grant's throat tightened. Just yesterday, he'd watched from his office window as Zion named each fish, laughing with pure joy as they surfaced for food. Now that same child fought for every breath, his small body betraying him with terrifying speed. The car skidded slightly on the wet road, bringing Grant's attention back to their surroundings. The storm had intensified, visibility reduced to mere feet ahead of their headlights. The world outside the windows had disappeared into darkness, pierced only by occasional lightning. Almost there, the driver assured them, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Tanya leaned forward suddenly. No, not Maddox Memorial. Grant understood immediately. County General, then? No. Her voice was firm despite her fear. Mercy Hospital. It's smaller but better. I worked there before Maddox. Grant nodded to the driver, who changed course without question. Sometimes in our darkest moments, we discover who we can truly trust. Who would you turn to when everything was falling apart? His breathing's getting worse, Tanya reported nurses, training evident in her clinical assessment despite her trembling hands. Grant checked his watch. Only 6 minutes since leaving the mansion, though it felt like hours. 2 minutes out. Tell me about Thomas Westfield, Tanya said suddenly, her eyes never leaving Zion's face. The question caught Grant off guard. What? Your text. I saw it over your shoulder at dinner. Her voice was steady, at odds with the storm raging around them. What does he have on me? This isn't the time. There may not be another time if Westfield succeeds in whatever he's planning, she countered. So tell me. The car lurched through a deep puddle, suspension groaning in protest. Grant steadied Zion's legs against the movement. Westfield claims there's more to your whistleblowing than professional ethics, Grant admitted finally. He says you had a personal vendetta. A bitter smile crossed Tanya's face. Of course he would say that. Is it true? Lightning flashed, illuminating the pain in her eyes. Yes and no. Before she could elaborate, Zion's body went rigid again, another seizure taking hold. We're here, the driver announced as the hospital's emergency entrance came into view. What followed was controlled chaos. Tanya's former colleagues recognized her instantly. Professionalism, overriding questions about why she arrived in a billionaire's car. Grant stood back, watching as they rushed Zion into an examination room, Tanya following close behind, still clutching the dinosaur toy. Alone in the waiting room, Grant paced, rain dripping from his clothes onto polished floors. The storm outside continued its assault, power flickering ominously throughout the building. An hour passed. Then another. When Tanya finally emerged, her face was ashen. Bacterial meningitis, she said, the words falling like stones. They've started antibiotics, but she didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Grant stepped forward, closing the distance between them. What do you need? They want to transfer him to Children's Hospital downtown. They have better equipment, specialists. I'll arrange it. Helicopter if the storm breaks enough. She nodded, too exhausted for pride or arguments. Thank you, Tanya, Grant said softly. He's going to be okay. You don't know that. Her voice cracked, the first sign of her armor truly breaking. No one knows that. When she swayed slightly, Grant caught her arm, guiding her to a chair. She didn't resist when he sat beside her, their shoulders touching in the empty waiting room. He's all I have, she whispered, the words barely audible above the storm. If I lose him, you won't, Grant promised, though he had no right to make such guarantees. And you're not alone anymore. Her head turned, eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Whatever she saw there made her reach for his hand, gripping it with surprising strength. I need you to mean that, she said. Not just now, not just tonight, because I can't do this alone again. The raw vulnerability in her voice struck deeper than any business negotiation, any legal threat. This wasn't about charity or redemption anymore. This was about presence, about showing up when it mattered most. In times of crisis, we discover who stays when everyone else walks away. Who has stayed for you when your world was falling apart? I mean it, Grant said, his voice low with certainty. Whatever happens, you're not alone. For a moment, they sat in silence, hands linked, the storm raging outside, while another kind of storm raged in the treatment room where Zion fought his invisible battle. A doctor appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Miss Fields, we've stabilized him enough for transport. The children's hospital team is waiting. Tanya stood, Grant rising beside her, their hands still connected. One more thing, the doctor added, his expression grave. We'll need his full medical history. Any conditions, previous hospitalizations. Tanya tensed beside Grant. He was treated at County General last year. Pneumonia. The doctor made a note. Insurance information? I'll handle it, Grant interjected. Whatever he needs. As they prepared to follow the medical team, Tanya turned to Grant, her expression unreadable. You should know something, she said quietly, about Thomas Westfield, and why I reported the hospital. Grant waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. My grandmother was a patient at Maddox Memorial during the staffing cuts, Tanya continued, each word measured and precise. She died because her call button went unanswered for 40 minutes. The nurse assigned to her had 14 other patients that night. The revelation hit Grant like a physical blow. Tanya, I didn't know. How could you? She interrupted. You were just looking at spreadsheets, remember? Not people. Before he could respond, a nurse called urgently from down the hall. Miss Fields, he's asking for you. Tanya's focus shifted. Instantly, all other concerns forgotten as she rushed toward her son. Grant followed more slowly, the weight of her revelation settling like lead in his stomach. At the treatment room door, he paused, watching through the window as Tanya bent over Zion's bed, stroking his hair, whispering words of comfort only a mother could provide. The boy's small hand reached for hers, seeking anchor in his storm of fever and confusion. The scene before him blurred slightly as unexpected moisture gathered in Grant's eyes. This, he realized, was what he'd been missing for 12 years. Not just Aiden, but connection itself. The messy, terrifying, beautiful reality of caring about someone else more than yourself. As if sensing his presence, Zion's eyes shifted toward the window. The boy lifted his free hand in a weak wave, a ghost of his usual smile flickering across his fever-flushed face. Grant raised his hand in response, making a silent promise to both the child and himself. This time, he wouldn't walk away. This time, he would stay. The corridor lights flickered suddenly, plunging the hospital into momentary darkness. When emergency generators kicked in, the doctor's expression had changed from professional concern to alarm. We need to move him now, he announced, checking monitors that began blaring urgent warnings. His blood pressure's dropping. He's going into shock. As medical staff rushed into action, Tanya's eyes found Grant's through the window. Terror meeting. Determination in a silent exchange. More binding than any contract. Sometimes the most important promises are the ones we make without words. Will you be the person who stays when everyone else leaves? You should be in bed. Grant stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching as Tanya wiped down counters with precise, determined movements. 10 days had passed since that terrifying night at the hospital. Zion had fought through the worst of the meningitis, finally being released yesterday with strict recovery instructions. Yet here was Tanya at 6 in the morning, limping slightly as she worked, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "So should you," she countered without turning around. "Billionaires need sleep too." The easy familiarity between them had been forged in hospital waiting rooms, in whispered conversations over Zion's bed, in shared vigils when his fever spiked dangerously high. Grant had canceled meetings, delegated decisions, lived in wrinkled clothes for days, choices that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "How's your ankle?" he asked, moving into the kitchen. "It's fine." Her dismissive tone contradicted the visible wince as she shifted weight. "That's not what the doctor said." During the hospital stay, Tanya had slipped on wet stairs, badly twisting her ankle while rushing back from the cafeteria with coffee. The X-ray showed no break, but the sprain was severe. The doctor had ordered rest, elevation, compression, all instructions Tanya had systematically ignored. What drives some people to push through pain while others yield to it? Is it strength or fear that keeps us moving when our bodies beg to stop? "Doctors exaggerate," she said, reaching for a high shelf despite her injury. "Besides, I start my hospital consultant position tomorrow. Can't show weakness on day one." Grant moved beside her, easily retrieving the container she struggled to reach. "Postpone it. Take time with Zion." "No." The single word carried the weight of years of determination. "This is too important to delay." Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating her exhaustion and the stubborn set of her jaw. For the first time, Grant noticed strands of gray in her dark hair. Not age, but stress taking its toll. He wondered how many had appeared during those terrible nights when Zion's life hung in the balance. "Maria can handle things here." He tried again. "You should rest." Tanya finally turned to face him, challenge in her eyes. "Would you? If it were your child who almost died? If it were your chance to fix something that mattered?" The question struck him silent. Would he? The Grant Maddox of a month ago would have delegated, disappeared, protected himself from the messy reality of human suffering. But now? "No," he admitted. "I wouldn't rest either." Something softened in her expression. Not weakness, but recognition. "Then don't ask me to." Have you ever recognized your own flaws in someone else's strength? The kitchen door swung open as Zion appeared, still in pajamas, his small frame thinner after the hospital stay. The boy moved carefully, body remembering pain, even as it healed. "Morning," he said, voice still raspy but stronger than yesterday. Tanya's entire demeanor transformed, maternal love erasing exhaustion. "Hey, baby, how are you feeling?" "Hungry." Zion climbed onto a stool at the island, legs swinging slightly. "Can I have Grandma's healing soup for breakfast?" "That's not exactly breakfast food," Tanya said, already moving to the refrigerator. "Says who?" Grant interjected, winking at Zion. "I think healing soup is perfect for breakfast." The boy's answering smile, still shadow of its former brightness but genuine, sent warmth spreading through Grant's chest. This child who had nearly been lost now sat in his kitchen, asking for soup before sunrise. The miracle of it wasn't lost on him. "James said the koi fish missed me," Zion said as Tanya heated the soup. "Can I see them today?" "If you're feeling up to it," she replied, glancing at Grant for confirmation. "Absolutely. They've been asking about you." Grant settled beside Zion at the island, especially Moonbeam. The easy fiction delighted the boy, who launched into theories about what fish might talk about when humans weren't watching. Grant listened, marveling at the resilience of children, how quickly they bounced back, how completely they trusted in better days ahead. Would adults heal faster if we believed in tomorrow as easily as children do? As Tanya placed the soup before Zion, Grant noticed her slight grimace when she put weight on her injured ankle. "At least use the brace," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Makes me look weak." "Makes you look smart," he countered. "Besides, I have a board meeting this afternoon." We're voting on the hospital reforms you recommended. Having you there, with a visible injury from a hospital accident, would make quite the statement." Tanya paused, practical strategy warring with stubborn independence. "Fine," she conceded. "But just for the meeting." Grant hid his smile of victory behind his coffee mug. Even small concessions from Tanya felt like significant triumphs. After breakfast, Tanya went to check Zion's temperature and give him medication. Grant remained in the kitchen, watching through the window as sunlight touched the garden where spring flowers had begun to emerge. 3 weeks ago, that view had meant nothing to him. Just property, just assets. Now he saw it through Zion's eyes. Adventure, possibility, life unfolding. Maria entered, stopping short at finding Grant alone in the kitchen. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Fine," he assured her. "Just thinking. About Miss Fields and the boy?" Maria's knowing look suggested his thoughts weren't as private as he believed. "They've been through so much," Grant said. "Yet they keep going, keep fighting." Maria nodded, beginning her morning routine with practiced efficiency. "Some people have no choice but to be strong." "Everyone has a choice," Grant countered. "Do they?" Maria glanced at him, decades of wisdom in her eyes. "When you're rich like you, sir, choices are luxuries you take for granted. When you're struggling like she was, choosing to stop fighting isn't an option." The simple truth landed with unexpected force. How many choices had he taken for granted? How many times had he complained about burdens that others would consider privileges? What choices do you take for granted every day that others might see as unimaginable luxury? Later that morning, Grant found Tanya in the greenhouse, Zion napping in the garden suite, while she prepared soil in planting trays. She'd compromised with the ankle brace, though she still favored her good leg. "Need help?" he offered. "I've got it." She continued working, determination in every movement. "I know you do," Grant said, picking up a trowel anyway. "But sometimes help isn't about need. It's about sharing the load." She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face at his insight. After a moment, she nodded toward an empty tray. "Fill that one with soil. Not too packed." They worked in comfortable silence, the greenhouse warm despite the early spring chill outside. Through the glass walls, Grant could see his mansion, imposing, perfect, and until recently, empty of genuine life. "You never asked about Thomas Westfield again," Tanya said suddenly, not looking up from her work. Grant's hands stilled on the soil. "I fired him." Now she did look up, shock evident. "What?" "The day after Zion was admitted. I reviewed his files on your case. The evidence he claimed to have against you was manipulated. Dates changed, statements taken out of context." Grant resumed filling the tray. He wasn't protecting the hospital. He was covering his own negligence. Tanya absorbed this, emotions playing across her face too quickly to read. "Thank you," she said finally. "Don't thank me for doing what should have been done years ago," Grant replied. "I should have looked closer then." "We can't change the past," she said, echoing his own thoughts from countless sleepless hospital nights. "No?" He met her eyes across the planting table. "But we can fix the future." Something shifted in the greenhouse atmosphere, a current of understanding that transcended their different backgrounds, different experiences, different kinds of strength. "I used to think success meant more zeros in my bank account," Grant admitted. "More buildings with my name on them." "And now?" Tanya asked. He gestured toward the garden suite, where Zion slept peacefully. "Now I'm not sure anymore." The genuine confusion in his voice brought a small smile to Tanya's lips. "Welcome to the human race, Grant Maddox. Is true success measured by what you own or by who you become?" As afternoon approached, Grant left to prepare for the board meeting. Entering his study, he found himself staring at the wall of achievements, awards, recognitions, newspaper features, celebrating his business acumen. Not one acknowledged simple human decency. Not one mentioned courage in the face of suffering, or integrity when it cost something, or showing up when it mattered most. By every measure society valued, Grant Maddox was an extraordinary success. By the measures he was beginning to value, Tanya Fields, SPS, with her stubborn dignity and unflinching dedication to her son, made him look like a beginner. His phone buzzed with a text from his driver. Car ready for hospital board meeting. As he gathered his materials, movement in the garden caught his eye. Tanya was helping Zion walk slowly toward the koi pond, her own injury forgotten as she supported her son's healing body. Every few steps she would pause, letting him rest before continuing their careful journey. Grant watched them. This woman who refused to yield to circumstance. This boy who faced death with the courage of warriors, and felt something fundamental shift within his understanding of wealth and poverty, strength and weakness. He had built empires of steel and glass. She had built something far more valuable, a life of meaning, of principle, of love that transcended comfort. The revelation followed him into his waiting car, into the hospital boardroom where powerful men in expensive suits awaited his arrival. As discussions began about budgets and staffing ratios, Grant found himself thinking not of quarterly projections, but of a boy naming fish, of soup stirred with faith, of strength that limped but never faltered. When the vote came for the reforms Tanya had proposed, Grant stood. "Before we decide," he said, "I want to tell you about two kinds of courage." The board members exchanged confused glances as Grant began to speak. Not about numbers, but about a woman who had lost everything except her dignity, who had faced systemic failure and personal tragedy without surrendering her humanity. "We measure success by profit margins," he concluded. "But perhaps we've been using the wrong metrics all along." The boardroom remained silent when he finished, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "That's all very moving, Grant, but we have a responsibility to shareholders. These reforms will cost millions. And what's the cost of doing nothing?" Grant countered. "Ask Thomas Westfield, who's facing potential criminal charges for falsifying records. Ask the families of patients who died due to inadequate staffing." He placed a folder on the table. "Or ask the woman whose grandmother died alone because her call button went unanswered. The woman who tried to warn us, and who we silenced, instead of listening." The folder contained Tanya's original whistleblower report, evidence that had been buried, warnings that had been ignored. "She's waiting outside," Grant said quietly, "ready to help us fix what we broke. The question is whether we have the courage to admit we need fixing. What does it cost to admit you've been wrong about something that really matters?" They've gone back to the motel. Grant stared at Maria across his study desk, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "What do you mean, gone back? Why would they leave the garden suite?" 3 weeks had passed since the board meeting where Tanya's hospital reforms had been approved by a narrow margin. Her ankle had healed, Zion had returned to school, and a fragile normalcy had settled over the mansion. Or so Grant had thought. "Miss Field said it was temporary," Maria explained. "Just until the weekend, when they find a place of their own. She left this for you." She handed Grant an envelope containing a single sheet of paper. "Need to stand on our own 2 feet again. Thank you for everything. Room 118, Parkside Inn." The familiar address struck him like a blow. The same motel where he'd followed them that first week. The same room where Zion had seen him watching from his car. "When did they leave?" Grant asked, already reaching for his keys. "This morning, while you were at your meeting." Maria hesitated, then added, "She was very insistent, sir. Said something about not replacing one dependency with another." Grant nodded, understanding Tanya's reasoning even as he disagreed with it. After a lifetime of self-reliance, accepting help must feel like surrender. The garden suite, despite its comfort, was still his property, his provision. Tanya Fields needed to rebuild. On her own terms. But did that mean Zion had to return to a motel room barely larger than Grant's closet? Have you ever watched someone choose hardship over help? Because pride was the only possession they couldn't bear to lose? 20 minutes later, Grant pulled into the Parkside Inn parking lot. The place looked marginally better than when he'd last seen it. Someone had swept the broken glass, repainted the trim, planted marigolds in cracked concrete planters. He approached room 118, hand raised to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing here? Charging in to rescue them yet again? Tanya had made her choice clear. Perhaps he should respect it. As he turned to leave, the door swung open. "Mr. Grant!" Zion's face lit up with genuine delight. "Mom! Mr. Grant is here!" Tanya appeared behind her son, surprise followed by wariness crossing her face. "Grant, this is unexpected. I just wanted to check that you had everything you needed," he said, feeling strangely awkward for the first time in their relationship. "We're fine," Tanya assured him, her posture softening slightly. "Come in, if you'd like." The motel room was small, but meticulously organized, their few belongings arranged with the same care Tanya had shown in the garden suite. A single bed with a rollaway cot beside it, a mini fridge humming in the corner, a table stacked with Zion's schoolbooks. "We're planting a garden here too," Zion announced, pointing proudly to paper cups on the windowsill, green shoots reaching toward sunlight. "The manager said we could plant flowers by our door if we want." "That's wonderful," Grant said, marveling at the boy's resilience. No trace remained of his illness except a new seriousness around his eyes, as if having faced mortality had aged him beyond his years. "Mom got her nursing license back," Zion continued. "She's going to work at Mercy Hospital again." Grant turned to Tanya, genuine happiness warming his voice. "That's fantastic. When did this happen?" "Yesterday." A smile touched her lips. "The review board considered the new evidence. Your testimony helped." "I just told the truth," Grant said. "Finally," she added with gentle challenge. Their eyes met across the small room, respect flowing both ways now, the power imbalance between them slowly equalizing. "What would you sacrifice to make things right with someone you'd wronged?" "Can I show Mr. Grant my drawing?" Zion asked, already pulling papers from his backpack. "Of course," Tanya said, moving to the mini-fridge. "Would you like something to drink, Grant? We have water and—" "Water," he chuckled. "Water sounds perfect." As Tanya prepared their modest hospitality, Zion spread a large piece of construction paper on the table. "It's for school," he explained. "We had to draw our family." Grant looked down at the artwork, expecting to see Tanya and Zion holding hands beside a simple house. What he saw instead stopped his breath. 3 figures stood before a structure that was unmistakably his mansion. Tanya, recognizable by her dark hair and the brace on her ankle. Zion in the middle, holding a fish that could only be Moonbeam. And on the other side, a tall figure with silver hair and a blue tie. Him. "That's you," Zion confirmed unnecessarily, pointing. "See? I put you in because you're part of our family now. You and Maria and James and the fish." Grant stared at the drawing, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. In Zion's innocent understanding, he hadn't just helped them. He had been adopted by them, claimed as family by a child who had every reason to distrust wealthy men in expensive suits. When was the last time someone included you not for what you could give them, but simply because they wanted you in their life? "It's a wonderful drawing," Grant managed finally, his voice rougher than intended. Tanya returned with water in paper cups, her eyes moving between the drawing and Grant's face. Whatever she saw there softened her expression. "Zion sees the good in people," she said quietly, "even when they don't see it in themselves." Grant nodded, still processing the emotional impact of being included in their family portrait. After 12 years of isolation, of walls built against vulnerability, this child had simply drawn him in. No application required, no wealth considered, no conditions attached. "Why did you leave?" he asked Tanya, the question emerging before he could reconsider. She sat at the small table, choosing her words carefully. Because we need to build our own life, not borrow pieces of yours. I wasn't lending, Grant countered. I was sharing. Maybe. Her eyes held his steadily. But I need to know we can stand alone before I can truly choose to stand with anyone else. The wisdom in her words struck him. She wasn't rejecting his help. She was reclaiming her independence so that any future connection would be chosen rather than necessary. I understand, he said. And surprisingly, he did. As Zion showed him more drawings, Grant's mind raced with possibilities. The boy had talent that deserved nurturing. His education had been interrupted by homelessness, his potential limited by circumstance. Tanya would never accept direct financial support, but perhaps there was another way. When he left an hour later, Grant didn't return to his mansion. Instead, he drove straight to his lawyer's office. The image of Zion's family drawing burned into his mind. I need to set up a fund, he announced. Striding into Philip Harrington's corner office, without appointment, Harrington, accustomed to his client's directness, barely blinked. What kind of fund, Mr. Maddox? Educational. Anonymous. Grant sat across from the desk, certainty growing with each word. For a specific child initially, but structured to expand to others in similar circumstances. Name of the beneficiary? Zion Fields. Grant leaned forward. I want it completely untraceable to me. The money should appear to come from a foundation or scholarship program. Something Tanya couldn't possibly refuse on principle. Harrington made notes, years of experience keeping his expression neutral. And the amount? Whatever it takes, Grant said simply. Private school through college, plus an additional stipend for art supplies, music lessons, whatever he shows interest in. That's quite generous, Harrington observed. May I ask why the anonymity? Most donors prefer recognition. The question gave Grant pause. Why did it matter so much that Tanya and Zion never know the money came from him? The answer emerged with surprising clarity. Because this isn't about gratitude, he said finally. It's about potential. The boy deserves every opportunity, not because I'm giving it to him, but because it should have been his birthright. The system failed him. I'm just. He searched for the word, correcting an imbalance. Would you still help someone if you knew they would never thank you for it? Harrington nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. I'll draw up the paperwork immediately. The first distribution could be ready by week's end. Make it look official, Grant instructed. Tanya Fields won't accept charity, but she might accept what she believes is merit-based recognition of her son's abilities. As he drove home afterward, Grant realized something had fundamentally changed within him. For the first time in his adult life, he had used his wealth not for status or control, but simply because it was right. Not for recognition or tax benefits or business advantage, just because a boy with hope in his eyes had drawn him into a family portrait. The revelation should have felt monumental. Instead, it settled into his consciousness with the quiet certainty of truth finally acknowledged. The Grant Maddox who had walked past Tanya and Zion in the rain would never have understood this feeling. The man he was becoming recognized it as perhaps the first truly worthy act his privileged life. At home, Grant entered Aiden's room for the first time in weeks. The space remained unchanged, Y2N, a shrine to what was lost rather than a celebration of what had been. He moved to the desk, opening the drawer where his son's notebook lay. Help people like Dad does. The childish handwriting blurred slightly as Grant stared at the words. Had Aiden somehow seen a better version of his father than actually existed? Or had the boy's faith been a prophecy of who Grant might someday become? He closed the drawer gently, a decision forming with unexpected clarity. Tomorrow he would call a contractor. This room had been preserved in grief long enough. Perhaps it was time to honor Aiden's memory, not through frozen absence, but through living purpose. As Grant left the room, his phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. Zion wants to know if you'll come to his school presentation next week. No pressure. Just asking. Something warmed in Grant's chest as he typed his reply. "I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for anything." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for including me." The phone buzzed almost immediately with her response. "We don't get to choose family. Zion says they choose us." As night fell over the mansion, Grant stood at his window, looking toward the lights of the city, where Tanya and Zion slept in their modest motel room. For the first time in 12 years, the massive house around him didn't feel quite so empty. Perhaps the greatest wealth isn't what we keep, but what we give without needing anything in return. What could you give today that no one would ever trace back to you? "Uncle G, look what I got!" Zion burst through the greenhouse door, waving an envelope so excitedly it was impossible to read. 3 months had passed since the motel room visit, spring melting into summer, relationships evolving with each passing week. Grant looked up from the tomato plants they'd started together. Soil still clinging to his fingers, a billionaire with filth. Dirt under his nails, a concept that would have been unimaginable just months ago. "What is it, buddy?" he asked, the affectionate nickname flowing naturally now. "A scholarship." Zion thrust the paper forward, eyes bright with excitement. "For art camp and a special school next year." Mom's crying but says they're happy tears. Grant carefully wiped his hands before taking the official-looking letter, his expression neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction. The fund he'd created had worked exactly as intended. The first distribution appearing as a prestigious scholarship program identifying promising students from underserved communities. The Horizon Foundation, he read aloud, the shell organization his lawyers had created. "That's incredible, Zion. Congratulations." "They said my drawing showed exceptional visual spatial awareness," the boy recited carefully, clearly repeating words he'd memorized. "That means I'm good at seeing how things fit together." "You certainly are," Grant agreed, thinking of the family portrait that had changed everything. How often do the smallest gestures, a child's drawing, a shared meal, a moment of trust, become the turning points that change our lives forever? Tanya appeared in the greenhouse doorway, her eyes indeed showing evidence of recent tears. But it was her smile that caught Grant's attention. Full, unguarded, reaching her eyes in a way he'd rarely witnessed. Over the past months, that smile had emerged more frequently, like a flower slowly opening to unexpected sunlight. "Did he tell you?" she asked, moving to join them among the plants they'd cultivated together. "He did. It's wonderful news. I can't believe it." Tanya shook her head in amazement. "Full tuition at Westridge Academy, plus supplies and transportation. It's the kind of opportunity I never thought." She trailed off, emotion overtaking words. Grant watched the play of sunlight across her face, noting how stress had gradually released its hold on her features. The wary tension that had defined her in their early encounters had softened, replaced by something approaching peace. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Better than okay." Her smile returned, eyes meeting his with newfound ease. "For the first time in years, I'm not just surviving. I'm living." The admission hung between them, simple, yet profound. Grant thought of his own transformation. Board meetings now balanced with greenhouse sessions, business calls interrupted to attend Zion's school events, solitary dinners replaced by weekly meals with Tanya and Zion in their new apartment. An apartment they'd found with Maria's help in a safe neighborhood near both Mercy Hospital and Zion's current school. An apartment Grant had never visited unannounced, respecting the boundaries Tanya had established to maintain her independence. Would you recognize your own transformation if it happened so gradually you didn't notice until you were already changed? "Uncle G is coming to dinner tonight, right, Mom?" Zion asked, already moving to check on his section of the greenhouse, strawberry plants that were his particular pride. "If he wants to," Tanya replied, glancing at Grant with a raised eyebrow. "I'll be there," Grant confirmed, noting the warmth that spread through his chest at the simple invitation. "I promised to help with the science project, remember? The solar system one?" Zion's face lit up. "I already painted Jupiter. It has 79 moons. Did you know that? I didn't, Grant admitted, continuing their ritual of sharing facts that impressed them. Mom knew, Zion said proudly. She knows everything. Tanya laughed. The sound still rare enough to feel precious. Not everything. But I did help deliver twins during my shift yesterday, so I'm feeling pretty smart. Pride filled her voice, the satisfaction of reclaiming her nursing career after years of injustice. Grant watched as she unconsciously straightened, professional confidence returning with each week back at work. Her role as the hospital's new patient advocate, implemented as part of the reforms she'd helped design, was already generating positive changes throughout the system. Sometimes the person who understands how to fix a broken system is the very one who was broken by it. Have you ever seen someone transform their pain into purpose? Did you tell Uncle G about your promotion? Zion asked, returning with a strawberry he deemed perfect enough to pick. Grant's eyebrows rose. Promotion? A faint blush colored Tanya's cheeks. It's not official yet. The hospital wants to expand the advocacy program to all their locations. They've asked me to develop and oversee it. That's fantastic, Grant said, genuine pride warming his voice. You deserve it. It means longer hours, she cautioned, watching him carefully. And some travel to the other facilities. I can help with Zion, Grant offered immediately, then hesitated. If you're comfortable with that. The pause that followed carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. He sighed, trust still being built, old wounds still healing, new possibilities still undefined. I'd appreciate that, Tanya said finally, her voice soft but certain. Something shifted in the greenhouse atmosphere, a subtle deepening of connection, of mutual reliance, freely chosen rather than forced by circumstance. Later that evening, Grant's driver dropped him at Tanya's apartment building. He'd changed from gardening clothes to casual wear, deliberately avoiding the suits that had once been his uniform. The paper bag in his hands contained the promised science project supplies, plus a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate Zion's scholarship. The building was modest but well maintained. Flowers planted along the walkway in patterns that suggested Tanya and Zion's influence. As he approached their ground floor unit, laughter spilled through open windows, the sound of genuine joy, unrestrained by worry. When did you last laugh so freely that the sound of it surprised even you? Zion opened the door before Grant could knock, launching himself forward in the exuberant hug that had become their greeting ritual. Uncle G, Mom made your favorite. Lasagna? Grant guessed, following the boy inside. With extra cheese, Tanya confirmed from the kitchen doorway, wooden spoon in hand, hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. And garlic bread that might be slightly burned. Perfect, Grant assured her, the domesticity of the moment striking him anew. How strange that this small apartment, a fraction of his mansion's size, now felt more like home than his own residence. Dinner progressed with comfortable familiarity. Zion dominating conversation, with stories from school. Tanya sharing patient interactions that had impacted her, Grant offering updates on the hospital reform implementation. Their lives had woven together with surprising ease, 3 damaged people finding unexpected healing in their connection. As they cleared dishes afterward, Tanya's phone rang, the hospital calling about a patient. She stepped into her bedroom to take the call, leaving Grant and Zion arranging planets on the dining table. Neptune goes way out here, Zion instructed, pointing to the edge of their solar system model. What about Pluto? Grant asked, carefully painting rings around Saturn. It's not officially a planet anymore, Zion informed him seriously. But we're including it anyway because Mom says just because someone changes your classification doesn't change what you really are. The simple wisdom struck Grant with unexpected force. How like Tanya to find deeper meaning in astronomical definitions. Your mom is very smart, he said softly. Zion nodded in solemn agreement. She smiles more now. Before we met you, she only smiled when she thought I wasn't looking. The observation delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty, caught Grant off guard. Does she? Uh-huh. Zion concentrated on placing tiny moons around Jupiter. She laughs too, and she doesn't look scared all the time. I'm glad, Grant said, emotion thickening his voice. Me too. Zion glanced toward the bedroom door, then lowered his voice conspiratorially. I think you make her happy, Uncle G. Before Grant could respond to this stunning assessment, Tanya returned, her expression troubled, despite her attempt to hide it. Everything okay? Grant asked, immediately alert to her distress. Fine, she said too quickly. Just a difficult case. But as the evening continued, Grant noticed her glancing repeatedly at her phone, tension returning to the shoulders that had finally begun to relax. Whatever the call had been about, it had disturbed her deeply. As he prepared to leave, Grant found a moment alone with her in the kitchen, while Zion brushed his teeth. If something's wrong, I can help, he offered quietly. Tanya hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. It's probably nothing. Just, she sighed. There's a new hospital administrator who's been asking questions about me, about my history with Maddox Memorial, about my relationship with you. Uneasiness settled in Grant's stomach. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he's looking for problems. Her eyes met his, vulnerability and strength mingling. The kind that make me wonder if the past is really behind us. Just as they'd found their balance, just as happiness had begun to feel sustainable rather than fragile, a shadow had appeared at the edges of their carefully constructed peace. I'll look into it, Grant promised. Whoever he is, he can't hurt you now. Tanya's smile returned, though dimmer than before. Life has taught me never to say can't when it comes to being hurt. She touched his arm briefly. But thank you for believing otherwise. As Grant left the apartment, the contrast between the evening's beginning and end struck him forcefully. The joy of Zion's scholarship, the warmth of their shared meal, the easy familiarity they'd developed, all now tinged with the faint chill of approaching threat. In his car, Grant made a call to his head of security. I need everything you can find on the new administrator at Mercy Hospital, he instructed. Full background, connections, motivations for asking questions about Tanya Fields. Right away, sir, came the efficient response. Grant ended the call, staring out at the city lights as his driver navigated toward his mansion. The happiness they'd built felt suddenly precarious, like a house of cards that might collapse with a single breath. But this time, he wouldn't watch from a distance. This time, he would stand between Tanya and whatever threatened her, not because she needed rescue, but because she deserved defense. His phone chimed with an incoming message from Tanya. Zion says to remind you about the science fair on Thursday. We both hope you can make it. Attached was a photo, Zion grinning beside their completed solar system. A Ben gap where he'd lost another tooth, eyes shining with the simple joy of creation. Grant smiled at the image, determination hardening within him. Whatever shadow loomed on their horizon, he would not let it dim the light they'd found together. His driver's voice interrupted his thoughts. Sir, there's someone at the gate. Grant glanced up, surprised. It was nearly midnight, well past the hour for visitors. Who is it? He won't identify himself, the driver replied. Concern evident. Security says he's insisting on seeing you personally. Claims it's about Miss Fields and her son. Cold dread washed through Grant's chest as the car approached his gates. A figure stood in the security spotlight. Tall, well-dressed, utterly confident in his stance. Grant recognized him immediately, though they'd never met in person. The new hospital administrator. What would you sacrifice to protect the happiness you never knew you needed until it found you? Who did this to you? The question cut through the afternoon quiet of Tanya's kitchen. Grant stood frozen, eyes fixed on the angry purple bruise wrapping around her upper arm, finger marks clearly visible against her skin. She'd reached for a glass on a high shelf, sleeves sliding up to reveal what her scrubs had hidden at the hospital. Tanya quickly tugged her sleeve down, her expression shifting from surprise to resignation. It's nothing. That's not nothing. Grant's voice remained steady, but cold fury built beneath the surface. Someone grabbed you hard enough to leave marks. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation at his gate. The hospital administrator, N10, Richard Coleman, had come bearing thinly veiled threats, disguised as concerns about appropriate professional relationships. Grant had handled him with practiced diplomatic skill, revealing nothing while learning everything. But this was different. This was physical harm to someone he cared about deeply. Tanya avoided his eyes, busying herself with the tea she'd been preparing when he arrived unexpectedly to drive Zion to his science club. It's just a misunderstanding. Really. With who? Grant pressed, the protective instinct rising like a tide within him. When she remained silent, he moved closer, carefully maintaining enough distance to avoid crowding her. Tanya, please, let me help. Have you ever witnessed someone's pain and felt as if it was happening to your own body? She sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. The landlord, she admitted finally. He raised the rent again. When I questioned it, he got insistent. He put his hands on you? The words emerged as barely controlled rage. It's not the first time a man has thought his power gave him the right to my body, she said quietly. The simple truth of her statement struck Grant with physical force. How many times had Tanya faced threats he'd never had to imagine? How many indignities had she endured simply to keep Zion safe and housed? When did this happen? He asked, struggling to keep his voice even. Yesterday evening. Zion was at his friend's house, thankfully. She finally met his eyes. I handled it. Grant, I always do. Always. The word hung between them, the exhausting reality of her life before him, perhaps continuing despite his presence. Give me his name, Grant said. No. Her refusal was immediate and firm. I know that look. I've seen it on men my whole life. The let me handle this for you little lady look. This isn't about gender, Grant countered. This is about resources. I have them. You shouldn't have to face this alone. I'm not alone anymore, she acknowledged, the admission softening her stance slightly. But I need to fight my own battles. What would you do if someone hurt a person you loved? Would you choose justice or revenge? Silence stretched between them, principles colliding like tectonic plates. Grant understood her need for autonomy, her lifetime of self-reliance. But the bruise on her arm triggered something primal within him. A need to protect, to make right, to ensure no one ever hurt her again. At least tell me what happened, he said finally. The whole story. Tanya hesitated, then nodded, gesturing for him to sit at the small kitchen table while she leaned against the counter. Rent was due yesterday. I paid on time, like always. But Elliot, the landlord, said he was raising it by $300, effective immediately. Her voice remained steady, factual. When I pointed out that legally he needs to give 30 days notice, he said rules are different for certain tenants. Grant's jaw tightened. Meaning? Meaning single mothers with nowhere else to go. Her eyes held his. He suggested there were other ways I could make up the difference. The implication hung in the air, ugly and familiar. When I refused, he grabbed my arm. She gestured to the bruise, said my attitude problem would cost me. That's when I told him I'd report him for assault if he didn't let go. Pride mingled with concern in Grant's chest. And he backed down? For now. She sipped her tea, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her matter-of-fact recounting. But the threat remains. He knows I can't afford to move again so soon. The scholarship money for Zion's school doesn't cover our living expenses. The different scholarship Grant had anonymously created, generous for education, but deliberately limited to preserve Tanya's independence. How often do our well-intentioned efforts to help still leave crucial gaps for those we care about? I could talk to him, Grant offered. No threats, no intimidation. Just a conversation about tenant rights. Tanya's expression softened slightly. I appreciate that. But we both know what would happen. The moment he realizes you're connected to me, I become a target for something worse than a rent increase. She was right. Grant had seen it countless times in business. Is no day is, when direct pressure failed, enemies found indirect methods. A billionaire defending Tanya would only confirm to her landlord that she had valuable connections worth exploiting. Then let me find you another apartment, he suggested. Somewhere safer. With what? More anonymous help? A trace of bitterness edged her voice. I'm grateful for Zion's scholarship, Grant. Truly. But I know it came from you. The revelation stunned him. How did you? I'm not stupid. Her gaze was direct, challenging. The timing? The specific amount that covered exactly what we needed? The foundation that has no history before this year. It all pointed to you. Grant hadn't anticipated this. Her awareness of his intervention, her acceptance of it, despite her principles. Why didn't you say anything? Because it was for Zion. Her voice softened. And because you cared enough to hide it. To protect my dignity while helping my son. That mattered. The moment stretched between them, understanding deepening like roots seeking water. Would you accept help you desperately needed, if it meant compromising your independence? The apartment door opened suddenly, Zion bounding in with his backpack. Mom! Uncle G! Are we still going to science club? Tanya smiled automatically, mother's instinct hiding all traces of the serious conversation. Of course, baby. Uncle G came early to pick you up. Grant forced lightness into his voice. Ready for rocket building day? Yes. The boy pumped his fist excitedly. I've been researching aerodynamics all week. As Zion gathered his materials, Grant moved closer to Tanya, speaking quietly. This isn't over. That bruise is assault. Legal, prosecutable assault. I know, she acknowledged. But pursuing it means risking our housing, my time off work for court dates, exposing Zion to ugliness he doesn't need to see. The impossible choice she faced was written in her eyes. Justice versus stability. Principle versus pragmatism. A choice no one should have to make. Promise me something, Grant said, keeping his voice low as Zion searched for his science notebook. If he touches you again, even once, you'll call me immediately. Tanya studied him, measuring his intent. What would you do? Whatever needs to be done, he answered simply. Legally, thoroughly, permanently. Something in his tone must have reassured her, because she nodded once. Okay, I promise. The agreement settled between them, just as Zion returned, oblivious to the undercurrents in the kitchen. Found it. Let's go, Uncle G. He hugged his mother quickly. Bye, Mom. Love you. Love you more, she replied. The ritual response bringing a genuine smile to her face, despite everything. As Grant followed Zion toward the door, he caught Tanya's reflection in the hallway mirror, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the bruise, vulnerability replacing strength when she thought no one was watching. The image burned into his memory, resolve crystallizing into certainty. He wouldn't confront the landlord directly. That would only endanger Tanya more. But neither would he stand by while someone threatened what had become precious to him. There were other ways to solve problems like this. Quieter ways. Permanent ways. In the car, Zion chatted excitedly about propulsion systems and fuel mixtures, while Grant nodded appropriately. His mind already follows, forming plans. One call to his real estate division, another to his legal team, a third to a private investigator who specialized in finding leverage. Uncle G, are you listening? Zion's question pulled him back to the present. Sorry, buddy. Just thinking about something. Grant forced his attention to the moment, to this child who deserved his full presence. About what? The boy asked innocently. Grant chose his words carefully. About the difference between justice and revenge. Zion considered this with surprising seriousness. Mom says revenge is when you hurt someone because they hurt you. But justice is making things right again. The simple wisdom struck Grant forcefully. Your mom is very smart. Yeah. Zion looked out the window thoughtfully. She tries to hide when she's sad or scared, but I can always tell. Grant's hands tightened on the steering wheel. How can you tell? She gets very quiet. And she cleans everything, even stuff that's already clean. Zion turned back to him, unexpected maturity in his young eyes. She was cleaning a lot this morning. What kind of world forces children to become experts in reading their parents' hidden pain? At the science club, Grant watched Zion join his friends, the boys' enthusiasm returning immediately as they began building model rockets. The scholarship had given him more than education. It had provided community, normalcy, the childhood he deserved. Grant stepped outside briefly, making the first of his planned calls. I need everything you can find on Elliot Markham, landlord of Parkview Apartments, he instructed his investigator. Financial records, legal history, personal weaknesses, everything. Looking for leverage, sir? Came the knowing response. No, Grant replied, the image of Tanya's bruise fresh in his mind. Looking for justice. By the time he returned to the club, a text had arrived from Tanya. Thank you for not overreacting. Zion needs stability more than I need vindication right now. Grant stared at the message, conflicted emotions swirling. Was he betraying her trust by acting without her knowledge? Or honoring her need for protection while respecting her independence? The answer came as he watched Zion launch his rocket into the clear blue sky, the boy's face alight with uncomplicated joy. This was what mattered, creating a world where Zion could thrive and Tanya could heal. A world where bruises didn't go unanswered, where power wasn't weaponized against vulnerability. That evening, after returning Zion home, Grant noticed Tanya's sleeve had ridden up again as she prepared dinner. The bruise looked worse, darker purples deepening to ugly blacks and greens. Does it hurt? He asked quietly, while Zion set the table. Only when I think about it, she replied, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. As Grant drove home later, his phone rang with an update from his investigator. Mr. Maddox, you're going to want to hear this immediately, the man said, without preamble. This landlord, Elliot Markham, he doesn't actually own the building. He's managing it for a property group. Grant frowned. Which group? Westfield Holdings. The name hung in the air between them. Majority shareholder is Thomas Westfield. The revelation hit Grant like a physical blow. Thomas Westfield, ITL, the former hospital legal counsel he'd fired months ago for manipulating evidence against Tanya. The man who'd buried her whistleblower complaint and stripped her of her nursing license. Sir? The investigator prompted, when Grant remained silent. There's more. Markham has a history of harassment complaints from female tenants, all settled quietly, all funded by Westfield's legal team. Cold clarity washed through Grant's mind. This wasn't random. The bruise on Tanya's arm wasn't an isolated incident of opportunistic harassment. It was targeted, deliberate, a message. Westfield hadn't just been after Tanya 3 years ago. He was still after her now. And he was using Elliot Markham to do his dirty work. Sir, what would you like me to do next? Grant's voice emerged with deadly calm. Nothing more tonight, but clear my schedule tomorrow morning. I believe it's time Mr. Westfield and I had a conversation. Some enemies hide in shadow, using others as weapons while keeping their own hands clean. What would you risk to protect someone from an unseen threat? We've been evicted. Tanya stood in Grant's doorway, eyes red-rimmed but dry, shoulders squared with the practiced dignity that had become her signature. Rain fell steadily behind her, soaking through her thin jacket. 3 days had passed since his discovery of Westfield's connection to the apartment building. What? When? Grant stepped back, ushering her inside. This morning, 48 hours to vacate. Her voice remained steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Apparently there were lease violations, noise complaints, unauthorized occupants, all fabricated, all impossible to, end quote, disprove quickly enough. Grant's jaw tightened. Westfield had moved faster than anticipated, a counterpunch to Grant's quiet investigation. "Where's Zion?" Concern sharpened his voice. "With Maria. She offered to watch him while Tanya gestured vaguely, words failing her, while I figured something out. The kitchen lights cast harsh shadows across her exhausted face. When she finally met Grant's eyes, the vulnerability there struck him like a physical blow. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. "Have you ever witnessed someone's walls crumbling? The moment when pride finally surrenders to necessity?" "You came to the right place," Grant assured her, guiding her to a chair. "We'll figure this out together." As he prepared tea, his mind raced through options. The garden suite was available, but he knew Tanya would resist returning to dependence. A hotel would be temporary at best. What she needed was stability, a permanent solution, beyond Westfield's reach. "I've been saving," Tanya said quietly, cradling the mug he offered. "Not enough for a security deposit on somewhere new, but maybe in a few months." Grant studied her, decision crystallizing. "I have something to show you." 20 minutes later, his car pulled up before a familiar building, the Parkside Inn, where she and Zion had stayed after leaving his mansion, where Grant had discovered Zion's family drawing that changed everything. Confusion crossed Tanya's face. "Why are we here? Come with me." They approached room 118, memories of their shared history hanging between them. Grant produced a key, unlocking the door to reveal the same modest space. But something was different. Fresh paint brightened the walls. New curtains hung at the windows, the carpet replaced with clean laminate flooring. "I don't understand," Tanya said, stepping inside cautiously. Grant reached into his pocket, withdrawing a document folder. "This is yours." She accepted it hesitantly, opening the cover to reveal a deed. Her eyes widened as she scanned the contents. "This says," her voice faltered, "this says I own this unit, and the neighboring ones." "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Grant corrected gently. "Just unlikely. What would you give someone who has consistently refused your gifts but desperately needs your help?" Tanya sank onto the edge of the bed, document trembling in her hands. "How? When?" 2 weeks ago, Grant admitted. "After seeing the bruise, I didn't just buy these units. I bought the entire property." "The whole motel?" Her shock was palpable. "Investment group technically owns it. Your name's on the deed to these 3 units, with Zion as beneficiary." Grant remained standing, giving her space to process. "The rest will be developed as affordable housing for single parents. You'll have neighbors who understand your journey." Tears gathered in Tanya's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have refused." "You're right." A mirthless laugh escaped her. "I would have." Grant moved to the window, looking out at the rain transforming the shabby courtyard. Workers had already begun improvements, planting flowers, repairing the broken fountain, replacing crumbling concrete. "Westfield can't touch you here," he said quietly. "He has no power over property you own outright." Tanya stared at the deed, fingers tracing her name. "I can't accept this." "You already have. Legally, it's yours, whether you want it or not." Grant turned back to her. "But if it helps, don't think of it as charity." "What is it then?" "Justice," he said simply. "Reparation for what my hospital took from you. For what Westfield did to your career. For 3 years of struggling when you should have been thriving." Morning light broke through the clouds outside, striking the freshly painted walls. Where peeling paint had once signaled decay, new beginnings now gleamed with possibility. Ordinary surfaces transformed by care and intention. Sometimes giving someone what they need, rather than what they ask for, is the truest form of respect. Have you ever received something you didn't know to ask for that changed everything? "There's more," Grant continued, sitting beside her at a careful distance. "The investment group? It's set up in your name. As units are renovated and rented, the income goes into a trust for Zion's future. And yours." Tanya's composure finally broke, tears spilling freely. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. You shouldn't have had to, Grant replied, the simple truth hanging between them. No one should have to ask for justice. She stood suddenly, moving to the window where sunshine now illuminated the courtyard. Workers waved at each other, sharing coffee during their break, unaware of the life-changing moment occurring in room 118. I've spent so long fighting, she said, her voice barely audible. So many years just trying to keep my head above water. I don't know how to stop. Grant joined her at the window, careful not to crowd her space. Then don't stop fighting. Just change what you're fighting for. Instead of survival, fight for thriving. Tanya turned to him, eyes searching his face for hidden motives, for strings attached, for the catch she'd been conditioned to expect. Why? She asked finally. Why go to these lengths for us? The question deserved complete honesty. Because you showed me what matters, Grant admitted. Because Zion taught me how to care again. Because some debts can't be repaid with money, only with meaning. Something shifted in Tanya's expression, the wariness giving way to something softer, more vulnerable. I don't know how to accept this, she confessed. You don't have to know right now, Grant assured her. The deed is in your name. The property is yours. What you do with it, live here, sell it, rent it out, that's your choice, your power. The word power seemed to resonate, straightening her shoulders slightly. How long had it been since Tanya Fields had power over her own circumstances? When was the last time someone gave you not just material help, but the power to shape your own future? Grant handed her another set of keys. These are for the adjoining units. They need work, but they're yours to decide what happens next. She accepted them with a steadier hand, possibility replacing shock in her expression. Zion could have a room of his own, she said softly, imagination beginning to awaken. And a proper studio space for his art, Grant suggested. The scholarship covered supplies, but not space. And maybe, Tanya hesitated, a dream long buried surfacing cautiously. Maybe a community health clinic in one unit? For neighbors without insurance? Grant smiled, recognizing the nurse emerging from beneath years of survival mode. Your name, your vision. She moved through the space with new eyes, seeing not what was, but what could be. Her fingers traced freshly painted walls, as if reading, Braille, connecting with possibility embedded in ordinary surfaces. Zion drew a picture of this place once, she said suddenly, not how it was, but how he imagined it could be. With a garden and neighbors, and a place that was ours. She turned to Grant, wonder mixing with lingering caution. How did you know? I didn't, he admitted. I just knew you deserved roots, security, a foundation to rebuild from. Sunshine broke fully through the clouds, streaming through windows to transform the modest room into something approaching sacred, not through opulence but through meaning. I don't know what to say, Tanya whispered. You don't have to say anything, Grant assured her. This isn't about gratitude. It's about setting right what was wrong. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, sunlight warming the space between them. Then Tanya did something unexpected. She reached for his hand, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture more intimate than any words. Thank you, she said simply, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity. Grant squeezed her hand gently, acceptance flowing between them. Let's go get Zion, he suggested. Show him his new home. As they stepped outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the world washed clean. Morning light caught droplets clinging to fresh paint, transforming ordinary surfaces into something that glittered with promise. A worker approached, clipboard in hand. Miss Fields? I'm the renovation foreman. When you're ready to discuss the adjoining units, just let me know your vision. Tanya's startled expression shifted to understanding as she glanced at Grant. You told them I'm in charge? He nodded. Your property, your decisions. Something powerful straightened her spine. Not pride exactly, but agency. The simple dignity of being treated as capable rather than needy. The greatest gifts aren't things we can hold, but chances to reclaim what we've lost. Our power, our purpose, our belief in possibility. What would you give someone if money were no object, but meaning was everything? Later, as Zion raced excitedly through the connected units, imagining his bedroom an art studio and a science corner with real telescopes, Tanya watched him with wonder, brightening her exhausted face. "He's going to have roots," she said softly. "For the first time since he was 4. You both are," Grant replied. Zion appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, there's a backyard, with space for a real garden." As Tanya followed her son outside, Grant remained in the doorway, watching their exploration. This feeling, witnessing joy he'd helped create without needing acknowledgement, was unfamiliar but powerful. His phone buzzed with a text from his head of security. "Westfield on the move. Arrived at your office demanding to see you. Claims to have information about Miss Fields you need to hear before making any decisions." Grant's jaw tightened. The battle wasn't over. Westfield was escalating, searching for new leverage now that the housing threat had been neutralized. What might he have discovered? What new weapon might he wield against Tanya's hard-won peace? As if sensing his tension, Tanya looked back from the small garden where Zion was already planning vegetable placements. "Is everything okay?" she called. Grant forced a smile, pocketing his phone. "Perfect," he assured her, "the lie necessary to preserve this moment of joy. Everything's exactly as it should be." But as Zion's excited chatter filled the spring air, Grant's mind raced with possibilities. What secret might Westfield believe he'd uncovered? What final card might he play in his vendetta against the woman who had dared to speak truth against him? The sun continued to shine on Tanya and Zion's new beginning, but shadows gathered at the edges of Grant's vision. A reminder that some enemies don't surrender easily, and that the price of protecting those we love sometimes comes due when we least expect it. What would you sacrifice to protect a happiness that had become more precious than your own? "You're leaving tomorrow." Tanya's words hung in the twilight air. Neither question nor accusation, but something in between. They sat side by side on the small porch of her newly renovated home, watching as the last traces of sunset painted the sky in purples and deep blues. Inside, Zion slept peacefully, exhausted from a day of planning his dream bedroom and garden. Grant nodded, the familiar weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders. "The Singapore merger won't finalize itself. 3 weeks is a long time," she said quietly. "It is." Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken emotions. 2 weeks had passed since the property transfer. 2 weeks of transformation. Its mole, both of the buildings and of their relationship. The careful distance they'd maintained had gradually shifted into something neither had expected nor named. "Zion, we'll miss you," Tanya offered finally. "Just Zion?" Grant asked, the question gentler than his usual directness. She smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the deepening night. "I've gotten used to having you around. It's going to be strange not seeing you burst in with some new art supply or science project for him." Have you ever recognized how deeply someone had become woven into the fabric of your daily life, only when faced with their absence? A firefly drifted between them, its glow momentarily illuminating the space they carefully maintained on the porch swing. Grant watched it float away, carrying light into darkness. "I've never had trouble leaving before," he admitted. "Business trips, vacations, they were always escapes from emptiness. Now there's something to miss," Tanya finished for him. "Someone," he corrected softly. Several someones. The admission hung between them, neither rushing to fill the vulnerable space it created. Crickets chirped in the small garden Zion had begun planting that afternoon, their rhythm marking time in the growing darkness. "You gave us stability," Tanya said finally. "A foundation to rebuild from I don't know if I can ever thank you properly for that. Grant shook his head. You have it backwards. You gave me something far more valuable. What's that? The will to care again. The words emerged with unexpected rawness. After Aiden died, I built walls so high, I forgot there was anything on the other side worth reaching for. The honesty of his confession startled them both. In the dim porch light, Grant could see Tanya's profile turn toward him, her expression softening with understanding. Grief can do that, she acknowledged. Turn you into a fortress no one can breach. You did, he said simply. You and Zion. With nothing but dignity and soup that tasted like faith. A small laugh escaped her, the sound warming the cooling night air. My grandmother would be pleased to know her recipe worked on billionaires, too. When was the last time you allowed yourself to be truly vulnerable with someone? To admit how they've changed you? Grant's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another update about Westfield, no doubt. He ignored it, unwilling to allow reality to intrude on this fragile moment. What will you do while I'm gone? He asked instead. Live, she answered. The simple word carrying profound meaning. Really, live, not just survive. Finish the renovations, plant the garden, set up the community clinic in the 3rd unit. You've decided to do that? She nodded. The neighborhood needs it. And I need to use my nursing for more than just a paycheck. To remember why I chose this path in the first place. Pride warmed Grant's chest. Not the possessive pride of having helped her, but the deeper satisfaction of witnessing someone reclaiming their purpose. You're extraordinary. You know that? He said quietly. Tanya shook her head. I'm just stubborn. That too. Their shared laughter faded into a comfortable silence. The distance between them on the swing, somehow both vast and infinitesimal. Grant found himself acutely aware of the space where their hands rested inches apart, close enough to reach, yet separated by invisible boundaries neither had dared to cross. What remains unspoken between two people who have shared everything except the words that matter most? Will you come back? Tanya asked suddenly, vulnerability threading through her voice. After Singapore, I mean. The question caught Grant off guard, not because he hadn't considered it, but because he had thought of little else. Yes, he answered without hesitation. I made a promise to Zion about finishing the solar system model. Just to Zion? She echoed his earlier question. A smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Grant turned toward her fully then, moonlight silvering the edges of her profile. Not just to Zion. Something shifted in the air between them, the careful distance they'd maintained, collapsing into nothing as their eyes held in the darkness. I need you to know something, Grant said, voice lowered with intensity. Before I go, before Westfield or business or life gets in the way again. Tanya's breath caught audibly. What is it? Meeting you and Zion. He paused, searching for words adequate to express the transformation they'd catalyzed. It wasn't random. It wasn't charity. It was salvation. The admission hung between them, too honest to be romantic, yet too powerful to be merely friendly. That's a heavy word, she whispered. It's the only one that fits, Grant replied. You saved me from the person I was becoming, from the emptiness I'd accepted as normal. Have you ever realized someone changed the course of your life at exactly the moment you needed it most? A lone tear slipped down Tanya's cheek, catching moonlight as it fell. Without thinking, Grant reached to brush it away, his fingers lingering against her skin, their first true touch, untainted by crisis or necessity. Don't stop caring, she said, echoing his own admission. Even when you're surrounded by people who've forgotten how. I won't, he promised, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity. As twilight deepened into true night, the boundary between them seemed to blur, not erased completely, but softened by shared vulnerability and growing trust. 3 weeks will pass quickly, Grant said, though neither believed it. We'll be here when you return, Tanya assured him. Both of us. The simple promise contained worlds of meaning, acknowledgement of connection, Permission for continuation. Invitation for something yet unnamed. Grant's phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. With reluctance, he glanced at the screen, his head of security's name flashing with urgency. "Business never sleeps?" Tanya asked, noticing his divided attention. "Something like that," Grant acknowledged, silencing the device once more. He wouldn't tell her about Westfield's increasingly desperate attempts to reach him, about the veiled threats and claims of information that would change everything. Not tonight. Not when this fragile peace between them felt too precious to disturb. Tomorrow would be soon enough for battles and business. Tonight belonged to this: the quiet porch, the cooling night air, the tentative bridge they'd begun building between their separate worlds. "I should go," Grant said finally, though everything in him resisted the idea. "Early flight." Tanya nodded, rising with him as he stood. In the dim porch light, her eyes held his with newfound directness. "Be careful in Singapore," she said. "It's just business. I meant with your heart," she clarified softly. "It's just starting to heal. Be gentle with it." The unexpected tenderness of her concern touched something deep within him. Without thinking, Grant leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture more intimate in its restraint than passion. "Might have been. I'll call when I land," he promised. She nodded, neither stepping away nor closer. "We'll be waiting." As Grant walked to his car, he felt her watching from the porch, a silhouette in warm light against the darkness. Something had shifted between them tonight. Something neither was ready to name, but both had begun to acknowledge. Driving away felt like leaving part of himself behind, a sensation both unfamiliar and inevitable. How strange that after years of global travel, this short distance now felt like the longest journey. His phone rang again as he reached the main road, his head of security, too persistent to ignore any longer. "Yes?" Grant answered. "Sir, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Westfield is making claims about Miss Fields that you need to hear. He says he has proof of something that will change everything you believe about her." Grant's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of proof?" "He won't say specifically, sir. Just that it involves her past and her connection to you. Something about it not being coincidental, that she approached you that night in the rain." Cold unease settled in Grant's stomach. "That's ridiculous. We met by chance." "Westfield doesn't think so, sir. And he's convinced enough people to start asking questions. The board wants to meet tomorrow before your departure." Grant glanced in his rearview mirror. Tanya's home now, just a distant point of light. "Tell them I'll be there," he said finally. As he drove toward his mansion, Grant couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. What possible connection could Westfield claim existed between him and Tanya before that rainy night? What secret might lie buried in her past that could threaten the fragile trust they'd built? And if such a secret existed, if their meeting hadn't been chance, but calculation, could he forgive the deception? The question followed him into the night, a shadow falling across the hope that had only just begun to bloom. How much does the beginning of a relationship matter once your heart has already decided on its ending? "She wasn't who you thought she was, Grant." Westfield's words echoed in Grant's mind as he loaded his suitcase into the trunk of his waiting car. Dawn barely colored the horizon, the world still wrapped in pre-morning shadows. His early flight to Singapore loomed, but the emergency board meeting demanded his attention first. The manila folder Westfield had delivered sat unopened on the passenger seat. Proof. The attached note had claimed that your homeless charity case targeted you deliberately. Grant hadn't slept, torn between trust and doubt, between the connection formed on Tanya's porch and the suspicious timing of their first meeting. Had it really been chance that brought her to his path on that rainy night? The desperate plea that pierced his carefully constructed walls, had it been calculated rather than genuine? As his driver closed the trunk, Grant made a decision. Before Singapore, before the board meeting, he needed one more conversation with Tanya. One chance for truth before suspicion could take root. The drive to her home passed in tense silence. The unopened folder, a silent accusation beside him. Morning mist clung to the streets, the world suspended between night and day, much like Grant himself, caught between trust and doubt. When he arrived, light already glowed from the kitchen window, despite the early hour. Grant approached with the weight of unasked questions pressing against his chest. Before he could knock, the door swung open. "You came back?" Tanya said, surprise evident in her voice. She wore nursing scrubs, clearly preparing for an early shift. "I need to ask you something," Grant began, the folder heavy in his hand. "Have you ever stood at the precipice between trust and suspicion, knowing your next step could destroy everything?" Before he could continue, movement behind Tanya caught his attention. Zion appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his small frame dwarfed by dinosaur pajamas. "Uncle G?" The boy's face brightened instantly. "You're here!" Grant's rehearsed questions dissolved at the sight of Zion's genuine joy. Whatever suspicions Westfield had planted, they couldn't withstand the simple truth of this child's unguarded affection. "Hey, buddy," Grant managed, tucking the folder into his jacket. "I didn't expect you to be up so early." "Mom has work," Zion explained, moving forward to wrap his arms around Grant's waist in their customary greeting. "And I wanted to finish my drawing before school." Tanya watched this exchange, her expression unreadable. "I thought you'd be on your way to the airport by now." "My flight's not until noon," Grant replied, the lie coming easily. "I wanted to say a proper goodbye." Zion's face fell at the reminder. "You're really leaving today?" "Just for a few weeks," Grant assured him, kneeling to eye level with the boy. "Business in Singapore. Is that super far away?" "About as far as you can go," Grant admitted. Zion considered this with solemn concentration. "Will you call us?" "Mom got a new phone that can do video so we can see your face." The simple request twisted something in Grant's chest. "Every day," he promised. "When did a child's trust become more valuable to you than all the wealth you'd accumulated?" Tanya stepped forward, resting a hand on Zion's shoulder. "Let Mr. Grant go, baby. He has a plane to catch." "Actually," Grant said, rising to his feet, "I thought maybe I could drive Zion to school on my way, if that's okay with both of you." Hope bloomed across Zion's face as he turned to his mother. "Can he, Mom? Please?" Something softened in Tanya's expression. Not just permission, but understanding. "Of course. That would help me get to work on time." 10 minutes later, Zion emerged from his bedroom, fully dressed, backpack in hand, excitement radiating from him like heat. "I'm ready!" Grant led him to the waiting car, the driver raising an eyebrow at the unexpected passenger, but saying nothing. As they settled into the back seat, Grant noticed the manila folder still on the front seat. He quickly tucked it into his briefcase before Zion could notice. "Is your car always this clean?" the boy asked, running his hand over the leather seat with wonder. "Not always," Grant admitted, thinking of the coffee cups and documents that usually cluttered his space. "I cleaned it special for Singapore." "And for me?" Zion added with certainty. Grant smiled, the weight on his chest lightening slightly. "And for you." As they drove through awakening streets, Zion chattered about school projects and the garden he'd started, and the names he'd chosen for the fish in the small pond they'd built together. Normal conversations that had somehow become extraordinary in their ordinariness. Have you ever realized that the simplest moments, a drive to school, a shared joke, a child's unfiltered thoughts, are actually the simplest moments, most precious? "Uncle G?" Zion's voice turned serious as they approached his school. "Are you coming back?" The question caught Grant off guard with its directness. "Of course I am." "Promise?" The boy's eyes searched his face with unexpected intensity. "Because sometimes people say they'll come back, but they don't." Understanding dawned in Grant's mind. How many people had drifted through this child's life during years of instability? How many temporary connections had been severed by circumstance? Zion, Grant said, turning fully toward him. I promise I'm coming back. Nothing could keep me away. The words emerged with surprising conviction, as if speaking them aloud made them more binding than any business contract he'd ever signed. Pinky swear? Zion extended his small finger, face solemn with the seriousness of the ritual. Grant linked his finger with the boy's unexpected emotion tightening his throat. Pinky swear. Satisfaction settled across Zion's features. Good. Because Mom smiles different when you're around, and I need help with the Mars rover for my science project. The simple observation landed with surprising force. Tanya smiling differently in his presence. The casual certainty that he belonged in their future plans. Trust offered without reservation. Could Westfield's accusations possibly stand against this? Against the pure connection they'd built day by day, moment by moment? As they pulled up to the school, other parents hurried children through morning drop-offs. Grant noticed the curious glances as his luxury car idled among practical sedans and minivans, worlds colliding in the school parking lot. What matters more in the end? The life you've built or the lives you've touched? Can you walk me in? Zion asked, gathering his backpack. I want to show you my classroom. Grant checked his watch. The board meeting loomed, followed by his flight. Every minute mattered in his carefully structured schedule. I'd love to, he said. Decision made without hesitation. Inside the busy elementary school, Zion proudly led Grant through colorful hallways, small hand gripping his with complete trust. They stopped before a wall of student artwork, where Zion's drawing held a place of honor, a solar system with each planet carefully labeled. Miss Jensen said it was the best one, Zion announced without pretense. I told her you helped me research. You did all the hard work, Grant assured him, pride warming his chest. At the classroom door, the moment of departure arrived. Other children pushed past them, the day's energy building around them. I have to go now, buddy, Grant said gently. Zion's face fell slightly before determination, replaced disappointment. He threw his arms around Grant's waist, hugging with the unreserved emotion only children can offer. 3 weeks isn't that long, the boy murmured against Grant's suit jacket. Mom says time goes fast when you're waiting for something good. Grant knelt, returning the embrace properly. Your mom is very wise. She says you are too, Zion confided, pulling back slightly. She says you just forgot for a while. The simple truth in those words struck deeper than any business insight or financial strategy. Had he forgotten wisdom in his pursuit of wealth? Had he mistaken accumulation for growth? I'll be back before you know it, Grant promised, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. We'll be here, Zion assured him, with a child's perfect confidence. As Grant stood to leave, the boy's teacher approached, recognition widening her eyes at the billionaire in her classroom doorway. Mr. Maddox, I'm Miss Jensen, she introduced herself. Zion talks about you constantly. Uncle G this, Uncle G that. You've made quite an impression. He's made a bigger one on me, Grant replied honestly. Have you ever realized that the people who change us most profoundly are rarely those we expected to matter? Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, the deep promise of rain returning. Grant instructed his driver to head directly to the board meeting, the unopened manila folder still tucked in his briefcase. Whatever accusations Westfield had compiled, whatever suspicions had been planted, they seemed hollow against the reality of Zion's trust. If their initial meeting had somehow been orchestrated rather than chance, did it matter anymore? Wasn't what they'd built since then more important than how they'd begun? As the first raindrops speckled the car windows, Grant found himself smiling rather than dreading the approaching storm. This rain felt different from that first night, gentler somehow, almost kind in its persistence, a cleansing rather than a burden. His phone chimed with an incoming message from Tanya. Zion just texted that you walked him to class. Thank you for that. Safe travels, Grant. We'll be here when you return. Such a simple message, yet it carried weight beyond its words. We'll be here. A promise matching his own. Grant began typing his response when another message appeared. This one from his head of security. "Sir, Westfield arrived at the board meeting early. He's showing them documents. Claims he has evidence that Tanya Fields knew your son before he died. That she deliberately targeted you for revenge." The world seemed to stop around Grant, blood rushing in his ears as he read the message again. Knew his son? Revenge? The accusations were more shocking, more specific than he'd anticipated. Could it possibly be true? Could the connection he'd felt with Tanya and Zion have been built on a foundation of lies? As rain fell more heavily against the car windows, Grant reached for the manila folder with trembling fingers. Whatever truth it contained, he needed to know before facing Westfield and the board, before his carefully reconstructed world could shatter once more. The folder opened to reveal a photograph. Faded, creased, but unmistakable. A hospital room. A young nurse. A boy in a bast hospital bed. Aiden. In the days before the accident. And beside him, smiling gently at the camera, a younger Tanya Fields in nursing scrubs. The past and present collided with devastating force as Grant stared at the undeniable evidence. They hadn't met by chance that rainy night. Tanya had known exactly who he was, had known his son. But why? And what else hadn't she told him? How much does a single lie of omission cost when you've built a relationship on what you believed was truth? The envelope sat on her doorstep, unassuming white paper bearing only Tanya's name in unfamiliar handwriting. No return address, no postmark, just appeared there like a ghost from the past. 4 months had passed since Grant Maddox walked out of their lives without explanation. 4 months of Zion asking when Uncle G would return, his questions growing less frequent as weeks turned to months. 4 months of Tanya checking her phone for messages that never came, of scanning business news for mentions of the man who had transformed their lives, then vanished without a word. Singapore had stretched from 3 weeks to 4, then silence. No calls, no texts, no visits, just absence where connection had been. Now this, an envelope on her doorstep, in the golden light of September afternoon. Tanya's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, heart accelerating despite her best efforts at indifference. She'd built walls again these past months, teaching herself and Zion to live without the presence that had briefly brightened their world. Inside the envelope, she found a single sheet of heavy paper bearing the letterhead of Horizon Educational Trust. Clipped to it was a check with more zeros than she'd ever seen, made out to Zion Fields Educational Trust. Dear Miss Fields, the letter began formally. We are pleased to inform you that Zion Fields has been selected as a permanent beneficiary of our full educational support program, covering all expenses through undergraduate and graduate education should he choose to pursue it. Tanya sank onto the porch steps, disbelief warring with understanding. This wasn't from some anonymous foundation. This was from him. Have you ever received a message that spoke volumes through what wasn't said directly? Mom, look! Zion's voice carried from their garden, pulling her attention from the letter. The sunflowers are taller than me now! Tanya tucked the letter into her pocket and moved toward her son's excited calls. The garden that had been mere seedlings in spring now exploded with life. Tomatoes heavy on their vines, bean plants climbing trellises, and as Zion had announced, sunflowers stretching skyward like yellow-crowned sentinels. The garden Grant had helped them plan. The garden they'd started together before he disappeared. They're amazing, she acknowledged, resting her hand on Zion's shoulder. You've taken such good care of them. Uncle G said sunflowers always follow the sun, Zion replied, his casual mention of Grant no longer carrying the pain it had months ago. Even when it's hiding behind clouds, they know where it is. The simple observation caught Tanya off guard, metaphor and reality blurring as she studied the golden blooms turning faithfully toward light. What do you follow when the sun that brightened your life suddenly disappears? What's that? Zion asked, noticing the corner of the envelope peeking from her pocket. Tanya hesitated, unsure how to explain. It's a letter about your education. From school? Zion's face scrunched with concern. Did I do something wrong? No, baby. She knelt to his level, finding the right words. It's from someone who wants to make sure you can go to any college you want someday. Zion's eyes widened. Any college? Even Space Camp College? A smile touched her lips despite everything. Even Space Camp College. Is it from Uncle G? The question emerged with innocent directness, hope flickering in his eyes. Tanya's throat tightened. Why would you think that? Because he promised. Zion's certainty remained unshaken. He pinky swore he'd come back, but maybe he got stuck somewhere really far away. But he'd still try to help us, even if he couldn't come himself. The unwavering faith in his voice broke something open inside her, the careful fortress of indifference she'd constructed against disappointment. Maybe, she allowed, unable to destroy his trust completely. It's possible. Have you ever seen a child's faith outlast your own, reminding you of what you've grown too guarded to believe? Later that evening, after Zion had gone to bed, Tanya sat on her porch steps again, the letter spread open on her lap. The garden before her glowed faintly in the moonlight, life thriving from what had once been bare earth. Like their lives, she realized. Grant hadn't just given them property or money, he'd given them soil to grow in, roots to establish, foundations to build upon. Then why had he left without a word? The question that had haunted her for months resurfaced, sharper now with the evidence of his continued, silent support. If he cared enough to ensure Zion's future, why sever the connection that had been healing all of them? Something must have happened that last morning, between his tender promise on the porch and his scheduled departure. Something significant enough to erase the bond they'd carefully built. Or perhaps, a quieter voice suggested, perhaps there had never been a real connection at all. Perhaps she had been a project, a charitable endeavor, a temporary distraction from his empty life. Perhaps Zion's trust and her cautious hope had been naive illusions all along. But then why the educational trust? Why the continued support without recognition or gratitude? The contradictions twisted within her, like the climbing beans in their garden. Growth and confusion intertwined, impossible to separate. What would you believe when actions and absence tell conflicting stories about someone's heart? As moonlight bathed the garden in silver light, Tanya found herself remembering their last evening together. The tentative vulnerability they'd shared on this very porch. The careful distance maintained even as invisible boundaries dissolved. The promise of something just beginning to bloom between them. Whatever had happened afterward, that connection had been real. She knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. From inside the house, her phone chimed with a text message. Probably the night shift nurse checking on a patient. Tanya sighed, rising to answer it before the sound could wake Zion. But the name on the screen froze her in place. Grant. 4 months of silence broken by 5 simple words. I know the truth now. I'm sorry. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the message. What truth? Sorry for what? Disappearing? Or something deeper? Before she could respond, another message appeared. Can we talk? I'm outside. Tanya's head snapped up, eyes searching the darkness beyond her garden gate. There, partially hidden by shadow, stood a familiar silhouette, tall, straight-shouldered, unmistakable even after months of absence. The sight of him, not a text, not a letter, but his actual presence, sent a wave of conflicting emotions crashing through her. Relief, anger, confusion, hope, all colliding like storms meeting over open water. She moved down the porch steps, the letter still clutched in her hand, stopping at the edge of the garden they'd planted together. The vegetables and flowers, things they'd nurtured from seeds, now stood between them like living witnesses to promises made and broken. 4 months, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. 4 months without a word. He stepped forward, moonlight revealing his face, thinner than she remembered, new lines etched around his eyes. I know. Zion asked about you every day for weeks. Pain crossed his features, genuine and unmasked. I know that too. Then why? The question emerged with all the hurt she'd carefully contained for months. Because I thought you'd lied to me, he answered, the words hanging in the space between them. About how we met. About knowing Aiden before he died. Understanding dawned cold and clear. Westfield had found the connection she'd never thought to mention. The brief overlap of lives that had seemed inconsequential compared to their present. I was his night nurse, she acknowledged quietly. For 3 weeks during my residency, I didn't think it mattered anymore. It mattered to Westfield, Grant replied, taking another step closer. He made it seem like you'd engineered our meeting, like everything afterward was manipulation for some kind of revenge. The accusation hung between them, moonlight illuminating the garden where trust had once taken root. And you believed him, Tanya said, the realization settling like stones in her stomach. For a while, Grant admitted, his honesty bare and uncomfortable. Until I looked deeper. Until I found the whole truth. What truth is powerful enough to bridge 4 months of silence and shattered trust? Which is, she prompted, unwilling to make this easy for him. That you requested transfer from Aiden's case when you realized who he was. That you tried to avoid any connection to me or my family. His voice softened. That our meeting in the rain really was chance, not calculation. Tanya remained silent, the confirmation unnecessary. She knew the truth of her own actions, her own heart. It took me weeks to unravel Westfield's lies, Grant continued when she didn't speak. More weeks to dismantle his attempts to destroy your reputation at the hospital. And then, she pressed. Then, I wasn't sure you'd want to see me again. Vulnerability threaded through his voice. After I'd doubted you. After I'd disappeared without explanation. When I'd promised Zion I'd return. The mention of her son's name sparked fresh pain. He still believes in you, you know. Even now, he thinks you must have a good reason for not coming back. Grant's eyes closed briefly, the weight of that innocent faith visibly heavy on his shoulders. He deserves better than what I did. Yes, Tanya agreed simply. He does. Silence stretched between them, the letter in her hand crackling slightly as her grip tightened. The educational trust, she said finally. That was you. He nodded. It's the one promise I could keep without complicating your lives again. Without forcing you to decide whether to let me back in. The admission that he'd continued caring from a distance, giving without recognition, struck deeper than any apology could have. Why now? She asked. Why come back at all? Grant's eyes held hers across the moonlit garden, the plants they'd nurtured together standing as silent witnesses. Because some promises matter more than pride or fear. Because Zion deserves to know that not everyone who leaves stays gone. The simplicity of his answer resonated with truth she couldn't deny. This wasn't about her or even about them. It was about a child who had already lost too much to circumstance. And what about your promise to me? Tanya asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider. On the porch that night, you said you wouldn't stop caring. I never did, he replied without hesitation. That's the one promise I kept completely. The admission hung between them like the fireflies now dancing among the garden plants. Fragile lights against darkness, uncertain but persistent. What promises would you forgive someone for breaking if their heart had remained faithful to what mattered most? As Tanya stood considering her response, the porch door creaked behind her. She turned to find Zion standing there in dinosaur pajamas, eyes wide with disbelief. Uncle G? He whispered, voice caught between sleep and awakening. You came back? The hope in his voice, after months of disappointed waiting, shattered the last of Tanya's protective walls. Whatever had happened between her and Grant, Whatever trust had been broken, her son deserved his chance at understanding. Yes, baby, she confirmed gently. Uncle G came back. Zion looked between them, his expression suddenly serious beyond his years. Are you staying this time? Or is it just to say goodbye for real? The question hung in the night air, innocent yet profound. Not just Zion's question, but Tanya's too. Not just about tonight, but about all the tomorrows stretching before them. Grant's eyes met Tanya's across the moonlit garden, seeking permission before making promises neither of them might be ready to keep. What would you risk to rebuild a connection that once meant everything, even knowing it could break again? Guess who called again? Zion burst through the front door, backpack swinging wildly as he waved his phone. Uncle G, he's in Tokyo now, and he saw a robot restaurant. Sunlight streamed through windows that once had been boarded, illuminating a home transformed. 1 year had passed since that moonlit confrontation in the garden, since choices were made about trust and forgiveness, about second chances and boundaries. Tanya looked up from the community clinic schedule she was organizing at the kitchen table, where once there had been desperation in her eyes, now calm purpose resided. The clinic she'd established in the 3rd unit had become a lifeline for the neighborhood, providing care for those the system had forgotten. Did he send pictures? She asked, setting aside her work. A whole bunch. Zion scrolled excitedly through his phone. And guess what else? His new hospital project broke ground today. The one for kids like me who get really sick. Tanya smiled, watching her son's animation. At 10 years old, he'd grown taller, more confident, the shadow of their homeless years fading from his eyes. The garden visible through the window had matured too, from seedlings to abundance, providing food for their table and extras to share with neighbors. He said he's coming back next week. Zion continued, grabbing an apple from the bowl on the counter, fruit from their own trees. He wants to see my science fair project. That's wonderful, Tanya replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest at the news. Their relationship with Grant had found its own rhythm this past year, not the intense daily connection of before, but something more measured, more intentional. His business still took him around the world, but calls came regularly now, promises kept in both small ways and large. Have you ever discovered that healing sometimes requires distance before closeness can be rebuilt on stronger foundations? The doorbell rang, interrupting Tanya's thoughts. Zion raced to answer it, returning moments later with Miss Ramirez from next door, her infant daughter cradled against her shoulder. I'm sorry to bother you, the young mother began, worry creasing her forehead. Lucia's fever won't break, and the hospital wants insurance I don't have. You're not bothering me, Tanya assured her, nurse's instincts immediately engaging as she reached for the feverish child. The clinic's officially closed, but I'm never off duty for neighbors. As Tanya examined the baby, Zion automatically gathered supplies, thermometer, children's medicine, the cooling cloths they'd once used during his own illness. The easy competence in his movements spoke of a child who'd learned compassion through experience. 102.3, Tanya reported, administering the proper dose of medication. Probably an ear infection. I can call in antibiotics to the pharmacy. Relief washed over Miss Ramirez's face. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed, Tanya replied simply. Just pass it forward when you can. How differently might the world operate if giving freely without expectation became our natural response to those in need? Later that evening, as sunset painted their kitchen in warm gold, Tanya and Zion prepared dinner together. A ritual that had once been hurried survival, now transformed into shared pleasure. Fresh vegetables from their garden filled the countertop, the soup they created together reminiscent of Grandma's healing recipe. Mom, Zion said thoughtfully, as he carefully chopped carrots, when I grow up, I want to help people like you and Uncle G do. Tanya glanced at her son, noticing the serious determination in his young face. Is that so? He nodded. Yeah. But I can't decide if I should be a doctor like you wanted to be, or build hospitals like Uncle G does. You could do both, she suggested, adding herbs to the pot. Or something completely different that helps in your own unique way. I just want to make things better for people who need it, Zion explained, his simple wisdom striking deeper than he knew. Like how things got better for us. Tanya paused in her stirring memory, carrying her back to that rainy night on Main Street, desperate, hungry, offering the only thing she had left. How different their world was now, not just materially, but spiritually. The security they'd found hadn't made them complacent. It had freed them to extend their own hands to others. That's how blessings keep moving, she told him softly. They're not meant to stop with us. Have you noticed how those who have experienced true hardship often become the most generous when their situation improves? The evening settled around them with a peace that once seemed impossible. After dinner, as they sat on their front porch, watching fireflies emerge, Zion's phone rang, with Grant's familiar tone. He video called, the boy announced excitedly. Mom, come say hi. Tanya moved beside her son, their faces framing together in the screen where Grant's appeared, the Tokyo skyline glittering behind him. There's my favorite scientist. Grant greeted Zion with a warmth that had only deepened with time and distance. His eyes shifted to include Tanya. And my favorite nurse practitioner. How's the clinic today? Busy, she replied. The easy conversation between them. A hard-won victory after months of careful rebuilding. 6 ear infections, 2 strep throats, and Mrs. Gonzalez finally agreed to start her blood pressure medication. Pride flickered across Grant's expression. You're changing lives over there. Small changes, Tanya corrected. 1 person at a time. Those are the only ones that last, Grant replied. Wisdom earned through his own journey evident in his voice. What transformations become possible when we stop trying to change the whole world at once and instead focus on the one life directly before us? As Zion chatted animatedly about his science project, its study-effective water filtration system inspired by their garden irrigation, Tanya studied Grant's face on the screen. The haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes had faded, replaced by something approaching contentment. His work remained important, but it no longer defined him entirely. They had both learned to expand their definitions of success this past year. When the call ended, Zion went inside to finish homework, leaving Tanya alone on the porch with the gathering dusk. From this vantage point, she could see several neighboring homes, all part of the renovated property, all housing families who had known struggles similar to hers. The community they'd built together had become something none of them could have created alone. Her phone chimed with a text from Grant. The Children's Hospital will have a free clinic modeled after yours. Board approved it unanimously today. Your blueprint is spreading. Warmth bloomed in Tanya's chest at the recognition not of herself, but of the work that had become her calling. This wasn't charity or pity from him anymore. It was partnership, respect, shared purpose. She typed back, "That's what happens when blessings keep moving." His response came quickly. "I've been thinking about moving too. Tokyo makes me realize how far away Singapore was, how unnecessary the distance." Tanya's breath caught slightly at the implication. They had maintained careful boundaries this past year, his visits planned and predictable, their connection warm but measured. Neither had pushed for definitions or commitments beyond the friendship they'd rebuilt. Was he suggesting something different now? Her fingers hovered over the screen, uncertain how to respond. Before she could decide, another message appeared. "I miss you both when I'm away. More than I should probably admit in a text." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within her, the part that had cautiously begun to hope again, despite all protective instincts. What walls around your heart might be ready to come down if the right person approached with patience rather than demand. Before she could respond, movement at the garden gate caught her attention. A woman stood there, uncertainty evident in her posture, a small child, clutching her hand. Tanya recognized the signs immediately. The careful way they carried themselves, the weathered backpack, the look of someone gathering courage to ask for help. "Excuse me," the woman called softly. "Someone said you might be able to help us. We just need somewhere safe tonight." Tanya slipped her phone into her pocket, Grant's message waiting as she moved toward the gate. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Another rainy evening, another mother and child in need, another chance to extend the circle of compassion that had transformed her own life. "Come in," she said, opening the gate without hesitation. "I have soup on the stove and a spare room ready." The relief that washed over the woman's face mirrored what Tanya had felt that first night, when Grant hadn't walked past them in the rain. "I can't pay you," the woman began. "You don't need to," Tanya assured her. "Just pass. Take it forward when you're able." As they walked toward the warm light of her home, Tanya glanced back at the darkening street where she had once stood hungry and desperate. The contrast struck her with almost physical force. In the tension, the change in circumstances, but the change in her own heart. Once she had been the one needing help. Now she could be the one offering it. From inside, Zion's voice called out. The same child who had shivered beside her in the rain, now warm, educated, thriving. "Mom, is someone here? Should I set extra places?" "Yes," she called back, guiding their guests inside. "We have visitors." As the door closed behind them, Tanya's phone lit up with one more message from Grant. "Westfield's behind bars for fraud." The final chapter closed. "Now we get to write our own." She smiled, tucking the phone away again. There would be time to respond later, to explore what his words might mean for their carefully reconstructed relationship. For now, there were hungry people. At her table, needs she could meet, blessings she could pass forward. The rain that had begun to fall outside felt different from that desperate night years ago. Gentle, cleansing, a reminder that storms eventually pass and new growth follows. What storms in your life have eventually yielded to unexpected blessings that you now have the opportunity to share with others? "Please, sir, take my son instead. He's hungrier than me." Words spoken in rain and desperation now echo in sunlight and abundance. 2 years have passed since that night, when dignity faced indifference on a rain-soaked street. 2 years since 3 separate lives collided and were forever changed by that moment of radical vulnerability. Morning light streams through windows of the community center that once was a forgotten motel. Inside, Tanya stands before a room of medical students, her nurse practitioner's coat crisp and white against her dark skin. "True wealth," she tells them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has lived in both worlds, "is not what you keep. It's what you give when no one is watching." The students, future doctors volunteering at her expanding clinic network, lean forward, captivated by the authenticity in her words. They've read about the Fields method in their textbooks, a revolutionary approach to community healthcare born from one woman's journey from homelessness to healing. What legacy might you create if your greatest struggles became the foundation for others' transformation? Outside, in the garden that once held only dreams, Zion kneels in soil warmed by spring sunshine. At 12, his features have matured, but his eyes still hold that old soul wisdom that once saw possibility where others saw only poverty. "The tomatoes need more support this year," he explains to the younger children gathered around him. "They grew so big last season they broke their stakes." The children, residents of what is now called Hope Housing, hang on his every word. To them, Zion Fields isn't just a neighbor. He's living proof that circumstances don't determine destiny. Across the courtyard, Grant Maddox stands in conversation with architects, his suit replaced by jeans and a simple button-down. The expansion plans spread before them will double the clinic's capacity, creating space for dental care, mental health services, and job training. The empire builder has become a community builder, his definition of success completely transformed. Have you ever witnessed someone discover that their true purpose was hidden on the other side of their greatest pain? A bell rings, calling the children to their tutoring sessions. Another program born from Tanya's vision and Grant's resources. As they race past, one small boy stops before Grant, looking up with solemn eyes. "My mom says you used to walk past people like us," the child states without accusation. "But now you stop. Why?" Grant kneels to the boy's level, the gesture automatic. Now, where once it top would have been unthinkable. "Because someone taught me how to see." His eyes find Tanya across the courtyard. And once you truly see someone, walking past becomes impossible. The simplicity of his answer carries the profound truth at the heart of this story. We are changed not by grand gestures but by moments of seeing, really seeing one another across the divides we create. What might change in your world if you truly saw the people you normally pass by? Later, as evening approaches, three figures stand together on the porch where difficult truths were once spoken. Tanya, Zion, and Grant, no longer strangers, no longer merely friends, but family forged through fire and faith. The governor wants to replicate the model statewide, Grant mentions, his hand resting comfortably beside Tanya's on the porch railing. The careful distance they once maintained has gradually closed, replaced by the quiet certainty of two people who have earned their way to each other. "It's not about the model," Tanya corrects gently. "It's about the mindset. Systems don't change until hearts do." Zion, taller now and growing daily, nods in agreement. "Like when you first met us, Uncle G. You had to see Mom as a person, not a problem." The wisdom from the boy's mouth draws knowing smiles from both adults. They've learned as much from him as he has from them. "Take my son instead," Grant quotes softly. The words that once shocked him, now held as sacred between them. "Do you remember saying that?" Tanya nods, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "I remember having nothing left to offer but my dignity. And you were the first person who saw that as valuable. How different might our world be if we valued dignity as highly as wealth?" As twilight gathers, other residents emerge onto their porches, the community born from one act of seeing. The elderly veteran Tanya once shared crackers with. The young mother, whose baby she treated that first night in their new home. The landlords, former victims, now homeowners, in a place where power serves rather than exploits. A tapestry of lives interwoven, stronger together than any could be alone. "Sometimes I think about that night," Grant admits, "watching the first stars appear. How close I came to walking past you. What I would have missed. But you didn't," Zion points out, his arm slipping naturally around Grant's waist. "You stopped." "The real question," Tanya adds, her voice gentle with hard-earned wisdom, "is who else is waiting for someone to stop? Who else stands in rain right now, hoping to be seen?" The question hangs in the evening air, not just for them, but for everyone hearing this story. A challenge wrapped in narrative, an invitation disguised as conclusion. What desperate plea might you be missing? Because it's easier to keep walking than to stop and really see. Across the courtyard, a new family moves into their unit. Another mother and son recently escaped from circumstances too familiar to Tanya. Their faces hold the same mixture of wariness and hope that once defined her own. Their hands clutch similarly meager belongings. Their eyes scan for danger even in sanctuary. Without hesitation, Zion crosses to them, offering to help carry their bags. Tanya follows with a pot of her grandmother's healing soup. Grant moves last, keys in his hand. Not a landlord's, but a neighbor's welcome. The circle expands. The pattern repeats. The lessons multiply. As darkness falls completely, lights illuminate the community from within. Warm windows glowing against the night like beacons. From the street, it might appear ordinary, just another neighborhood preparing for evening rest. But those inside know differently. Those inside recognize the extraordinary nature of ordinary compassion when practiced consistently, intentionally, relentlessly. Have you ever realized that the most powerful changes often look unremarkable from the outside? Morning will come again, as it always does. Challenges will arise, as they inevitably must. The work of healing, building, and growing will continue, never complete, but always progressing. But something fundamental has shifted in this small corner of the world. Something profound has been remembered that most of our society has forgotten. We belong to each other. Wealth is what we give, not what we keep. Dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered or honored. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply to stop walking and truly see the person standing before you. As dawn breaks over the community garden, sunlight catches on morning dew, transforming ordinary plants into something momentarily transcendent. Light spills through windows, casting warm rectangles on floors where children once slept hungry but now dream of possibilities. In this golden moment between night and day, between what was and what could be, Tanya stands at her window. Her gaze travels from the clinic that heals bodies to the community that restores souls, to the man and boy working together in the garden below. "Please take my son instead," she whispers to herself. The desperate plea now transformed into powerful testimony. "He's hungrier than me." The words mean something entirely different now. Not sacrifice, but legacy. Not surrender, but triumph. Not ending, but beginning. This is how transformation happens. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in daily choices to see beyond ourselves. In regular decisions to stop walking and start connecting. In consistent commitments to value dignity above convenience. What story might be waiting to unfold if you stopped walking today? If this story moved you, perhaps it's because you recognize its truth. That we are all one moment of attention away from changing a life, including our own. That wealth accumulated means nothing compared to wealth distributed. That true redemption comes not from grand gestures, but from sustained presence. As Tanya steps out to join her family in the morning, light, she carries the knowledge that has transformed everything. Sometimes the hungriest person isn't the one without food, but the one without purpose. Sometimes the most valuable gift isn't money, but meaning. And sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single, courageous request to be truly seen. Share this understanding, not just this story. Because kindness multiplies when lived aloud, when practiced openly, when offered freely. The greatest wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give when no one's watching.